Chapter 41. Satisfied? Very. Ivy chirped out. She captured another 4 Fomantis and seemed utterly enthralled by her new grass types. We were back at the cave without Lucario and Riolu, who had said goodbye as we made our way back. Well, I'm glad you bonded with them. 5 Fomantis were at Ivy's feet, and despite there being no sunlight in the cave, they didn't seem irritated, as they quite happily napped around her. She was grooming each of them, using what looked like a mix between an animal grooming kit and a gardening kit. It was kind of funny. But the Fomantis seemed to delight in the attention, each of them hovering around her legs as she pulled one onto her lap and simply worked them over. Checking leaves. Clipping here and there sometimes. Spraying stuff on or under their leaves. Any issues? A few mites. Pretty normal in wild grass types. This stuff clears them off, and grass types love being mite-free. Don't you? She asked, and got a cute little sleepy blink from the Fomantis in her lap as shifted to look up at her. Phoo. It agreed, and Ivy's smile ballooned into a massive grin. That's right. She agreed, reaching around and hugging the grass type to her chest. It was honestly super duper cute. Did you check over Phantom? He probably won't have any issues, but... I checked his stump that night. It helped keep me awake. She answered and glared at me. He had a few issues, but I cleaned him up too. It was weird though. I'm glad you caught him. He's a sweetie. He is. She agreed after a few moments. How did you even know about them? I've never heard of a Phantom before. Ivy. I said, utterly serious as I locked eyes with her. I love Pokemon. That's not an answer. She grumbled, but her Fomantis patch were eager for her attention, so she swapped out for another one and started taking care of them. Alright. I'm gonna head out for a bit then. I want to. I don't know, apologize to the gummy maybe? Anyway, I'll be back. Okay. Be careful. She called out, and I waved over my head as I left the cave and stretched. I decided to just walk to where the gummy cave was, so instead of releasing Arcanine, I called out my partner. Me. Milotic cried out and stretched before turning to look at me, and to my surprise, he leaned in gently and wrapped me in a hug with his fins. Hey. I grumbled, but leaned into the hug regardless. I'm fine. Honest. Just annoyed that I couldn't capture any Gumais. But I'm not gonna give up. I just need to try something different. You want to walk with me? Milo. I smiled as he unwrapped from around me, but I still had a fin reaching down and wrapping around my hand. We walked hand in fin through the forest, enjoying the ambience. Pokemon calls filled the air. Do you think they would like it if we made it rain? I asked and Milo nodded, which made me laugh, because he definitely didn't know. But just wanted to make me happy anyways. You're such a goob. Should just call you a goober. The evolved form of a gummy. I teased, and he actually looked offended for a moment as he puffed out his cheeks and bumped his nose into me. Okay. You're not a goober. You're my very special partner. The best Milotic in the whole world. Mai. He trilled agreeing with me, and I laughed as we continued walking. Soon enough, we found the cave, and I didn't see any trails of slime or anything, so I turned towards where the little pond was. I was much more quiet as I found the bushes that Arcanine and I had pushed through, and this time I very quietly peered through it. Goom. Gummy gum? Goom. They chattered to each other quietly. Each of them happily chewing on the leaves around the pond, or slipping in the little bit of murky water and drinking it up, looking refreshed every time. So cute. I whispered, as I watched. But eventually I had a decision to make. So I grabbed a berry out of my pack and waved for Milotic to stay here. Then I made sure to make a bit of noise as I crawled through the bush. The Gumais, just like last time, quickly worked to disappear and hide. But I came fully into view, and with a few moments' work I grabbed a bunch of leaves from the tops of the bushes, the places the Gumais couldn't reach, and then walked over to the edge of the pond. There wasn't one freaking out right in the middle this time, but I placed the leaves down and then the berry I quickly cut up into bits and placed them all over the leaves. Sorry for scaring you all earlier. I hope we can still be friends, I explained as I then slowly stood up and backed away. Milotic, do a rain dance. I called out calmly, but not quietly, and then a few moments later rain fell down into the pond. A cloud hovered over the pond. I hope you all enjoy, I said as I finally walked back through the bushes. Milo? I think I'm just going to take it slow. Come on, let's go exploring a bit more. There's a lake up there we can check out. Mai. Wooper. Wooper. Whooper. They were so cute. I was hiding behind some bushes with Milotic as we watched a small group of Whooper play in the shallows. A bigger Quagsire was halfway in the river, just kind of floating and keeping an eye on them. Do you think they'll mind if we come out to play? Milo. Milotic replied, and then to my surprise, he lifted off the ground and flowed over the bushes I was hiding behind. Milo. Milotic. He greeted, staying away from the river, but even then the Whooper instantly shifted, readying to flee, as the Quagsire lifted its big head out of the water, giving Milotic a dopey look. Eee. So cute. But then Milotic greeted them again. Milo. Milotic. And he just kind of floated over to the river a bit further down and slipped in, then he looked at me. The Whooper were watching him intently, but shifted and almost jerked into the water as I slipped through the bushes, but I did the same thing Milotic did. Hello. Please pardon us. We won't bother you. And I followed Milotic's path to the river and settled in beside him. Milo. He trilled both for me and the Whooper, and to my delight, they relaxed at Milotic's crooning. You utter Chad. I was smiling dopily as he serenaded me and the Whoopers. Even the Quagsire had lifted its head out of the water and was rocking a bit to Milotic's singing. It caused a calm to fall over the river, and to my delight, one of the Whoopers, probably the bravest, hopped over and settled next to me, and warbled along with Milotic. He wasn't nearly as good at singing, but it was like seeing a little kid try to sing along with an adult. It was adorable. I smiled at the Whooper, and since I totally had this now, I reached into my bag. The Whooper still going quiet, and I almost did as well, before I calmed and slowly pulled out a berry. You want some? I asked it, and a moment later I got a delighted smile. Whoop. Whooper. Okay, how about I split it, and the others can have some too? And I did just that. With a bit of work, I split the berry and handed a chunk to the bravest Whooper, who also got a bigger part. The other two slowly came forward, and when I offered them the berry, their hesitation slowly disappeared, and soon I had a little kindergarten of Whoopers around me. They sat down around me, faces covered in berry juice, and sang along with Milotic. Ah! My heart. Eventually, it was an explosion that pulled me away from the Whoopers, and I quickly threw out Dragonite, while returning Milotic. Come on, we have to go, I called as I jumped into her arms, and she blurred into the sky. The explosion had caused a dust cloud to rise up, although I took heart that it wasn't smoke. Just dust. And then we were there. Practically instantly, as Dragonite simply pushed the air away from her as she raced to the source. There was Ivy, Venusaur, and the cause of the explosion of dust. A golem. Thankfully, I breathed out in relief as Venusaur had beaten the golem unconscious and was standing protectively in front of Ivy, against the small group of Gravelers and slightly larger group of Geodude. A horde. Solar beam. Ivy called out, and a moment later Venusaur started sucking in energy towards her flower, and this sent many of the Geodude fleeing, although it only caused the Graveler to get more aggressive. Thrown rocks slammed into Venusaur, but a moment later it was over. The blast of solar energy washed over the group and that knocked the fight out of all of them. It didn't outright faint many of the Graveler, but it was enough damage that whatever had caused them to get angry with Ivy, they were now more interested in leaving. I watched as Geodude helped Gravelers, and Gravelers helped the golem up and then walking from the clearing. I landed down beside Ivy a moment later. You okay? Yeah. I was exploring and stepped on a Geodude. And then he attacked, and so I had Cluffy knock him out, but he called for more and more and more showed up. She exclaimed a little exasperated. Nasty. I mumbled but patted her on the shoulder. Good job. Thanks. She smiled shyly before sighing in exhaustion. Can you have Chansey look after Venusaur? He took a lot of boulders there. Yeah. Chansey. You're up. Chansey. Chance. She cheered as she quickly hurried over to Venusaur, and with a few moments of healing, he looked much better without the scuffs on his head. That was kinda scary. Ivy added after a moment of checking on Venusaur. I mean, I've been chased by a Geodude before. MT Moon was full of them, but I've never seen an entire swarm like that. It's this place. Kitakami, I mean. The Pokemon aren't as used to humans. I shrugged as I walked over and ran a hand over Venusaur's cheeks. You did great. Thank you for protecting Ivy. Venusaur. Vicky. Of course Venusaur protected me. She's my partner. Right. I agreed with a grin. Anyway. The Pokemon here. That swarm reaction? That was something that Pokemon would do against a Pokemon trying to eat them. They aren't used to humans. So they react with full force. It's scary. Ivy reiterated. I just smiled. They're scared too. That's why they acted like that. But not all the Pokemon are going to do that. I was just playing with some Wooper. They are so cute, Ivy. Did you catch one? Huh? No, we were just playing, and then I heard the explosion, so I came running. Oh. Sorry, do you want to go back and find them? She asked, sounding pretty disheartened, and it took me a moment to realize what she meant. Oh no. I wasn't going to capture a Wooper. They are cuties, sure, but that group was a little family, and I don't think any of them wanted to battle. I shrugged. I couldn't just force the cuties into a battle where I would take them away from their home. Right. Like Fomantis. Most of them didn't want to leave their home either. She agreed, and we both smiled to each other as we were both on the same wavelength. So want to ride Dragonite and search in a different area for cool Pokemon? There's a forest north of the lake that might have something cool. I offered, and Ivy took a second to think and then nodded. Yeah. I'd like that. Whoa, it's so misty. Yeah, I wonder what causes this fog. It's kinda pretty though. I muttered as we landed in a really dense foggy forest. Dragonite said, looking around the forest in irritation. What's wrong? Don't like the fog? Dragonite. She said, shaking her head. Let's have you return then. Take a break. Thanks, Dragonite. I added, and she nodded as she disappeared. Oh. It's my turn then. Ivy suddenly said as I was reaching for a Pokeball. Come on out. Free. Butterfree proclaimed as it instantly hovered around, and then to my amusement practically slammed itself into Ivy's hair, hugging and rubbing at the green strands. Butterfree. Ivy laughed as she very weakly struggled against his attempts to love his trainer. You've done a great job. Butterfree really loves you. Almost too much sometimes. Come on, Butterfree, I'm trying to show off. Ivy begged him, and a moment later he finally broke free, before doing a single quick flyby to rub his cheek against hers. Ah. Hush you. She demanded, but she was smiling and flushed regardless. Okay. Butterfree. Use Flash. She called out, and I blinked as a moment later the dark foggy forest had a bright spotlight shooting into it. Free. Oh cool. Oh. You got Flash for when you stall people. Stall? It's when you use substitute and sleep moves, and just try to whittle away at someone. Remember I told you about it? Yeah. She said nervously, smiling. I remember. It's my favorite tactic? I just didn't know it was called stall. Ooh. Ivy's gonna be a mean battler. I teased her, and she huffed at me. I did earn all of my badges after all. How many gym leaders gave you looks after, like they really didn't want to give the badge to you? I continued to tease, and then Ivy's ears went red and I realized I might have actually touched on something. Ivy, I said teasingly. It was the fighting gym in Saffron. They looked so conflicted because I only used Butterfree and the gym leader used his entire team. He, never really did anything? That's amazing. Great job. It was kind of embarrassing. No way. The only one embarrassed was him. I can't wait to see your matches during the Indigo League. I bet that's gonna be hilarious. Anyway. Butterfree. Guide our path, okay? Free. Butterfree. Come on. Ivy said and stomped off. I just giggled as I followed her. So what do you think is out here? Any more grass types? Grass obsessed. Just admit to being a mono trainer already. I demanded. I am not. Hee hee. I continued to giggle at her. I had been teasing Ivy by calling her a mono grass trainer since we were kids. Not a lot of grass types here, I think. Maybe more Phantump or Polchagist? This seems like their kind of haunt. Heh. Haunt. I chuckled and Ivy looked at me in confusion. Polchagist is a grass and ghost type. So haunt. Get it? Vicky, Ivy says, shooting me a look of disappointment and disgust. Wait. Another ghost and grass type? Yeah. That's so weird. Ghost types are kinda rare. So to have two of them be grass types as well. They are only rare in Kanto. Plenty of ghost types out there. I mean, I'm here to hunt another one as well. Wait, which one? Only the cutest, most bestest. The single most amazing ghost-type Pokemon to ever exist or will ever exist forever. I proclaimed loudly and without any hesitation. Then I took a deep breath. Mimikyu. I called out in a loud yell, startling Ivy and Butterfree, who jerked to look at me. Is there any Mimikyu here? I want to be friends. Vicky. Why are you yelling? What if we get attacked by a Pokemon? Then we deal with it. This is plan 1 of finding a Mimikyu. Yell real loud calling for them, and hope one hears and wants to be friends. Ivy just gave me a look and rolled her eyes. Only you would think to find a Pokemon by yelling for them real loud. Well, sure, if Mimikyu wasn't the cutest and bestest Pokemon ever, then it wouldn't work, but if you know what a Mimikyu is, then you know this is the best way to find them. Or at least I think it is. Mimikyu. Are you there? I yelled out again, getting a second jolt from Ivy. Vicky. Stop that. She hissed and whacked me on the arm. No amount of physical violence will stop me from finding my new best pal, Mimikyu. I told her firmly, then turned. Mimikyu. Do you want to be friends with me? The forest was silent, the fog muffling my voice. I just waited for a while, looking around hopefully, as Butterfree continued to light up our area. But nothing came out. Come on. Let's keep walking. Maybe we'll run into something? Ivy offered and I nodded, slowly. Mimikyu. Are you there? Ivy just sighed as she tugged me along. It's not like I've given up or anything. I mean, I'm sure I can find one eventually, I just hope to have something more to add to my team by now. Ivy already caught Fomantis and Phantump, and I haven't added anything new. I was really hoping for some cuties by now. I mean, sure, I haven't traveled up on the mountain yet, where the Gibble will hang out, but no Gummy? No Mimikyu? It makes me sad. Kekuu. Yeah, I know. You'd think I would have found like a dozen Pokemon that want to go out on an adventure, travel the world, eat good food, and become as strong as legends. But I keep scaring them. This place. You Pokemon aren't used to humans. So you either attack full bore, or you run away. Probably because you think we are going to eat you or something. We aren't. The only reason I'm holding you is so we don't just leave you on the ground paralyzed. I informed the poor Starly that was in my arms. It and its friends had decided to attack us. For no reason. At all. I mean, sure I had been yelling. And the sun was going down, so maybe I woke up a few of them, but that wasn't really my fault. I was Mimikyu hunting. Butterfree is pretty good with that stun spore, I said to Starly as I patted its head one last time. Its struggles were growing a bit stronger as the stun spore wore off. Alright. I'll let you go, I offered, releasing the bird as I turned my attention to Chansey, who was still healing the Staravia that had led this band. Butterfree had released a pretty big stun spore and half the birds had fallen out of the air to smack into trees. All done? I asked, and Chansey nodded, looking pleased as it quickly jumped into the air and away, leading its entire group out of the clearing. Vicky, can you please stop yelling now? Ivy asked, glaring at me, but honestly she just looked cute with her hands on her hips and leaning forward a bit. Okay, it was more looming cause she was taller than me, but still. I opened my mouth to once more point out what I was doing, but instead just sighed. Yeah, I'll stop yelling. Good, Ivy added with a huff, and then she looked at me, and looked a little conflicted. I'm sure we'll find one, and when we do, I know you'll manage to make friends with them. That's now what happened with the gummy, I grumbled, stomping off a bit into the forest. Oh Vicky, that's just special circumstances. You're great with Pokemon, Ivy exclaimed as she hurried after me, running around to my side and looking all sad. It's fine, Ivy. Honest, I admit as I stop and turn towards her. I'm just grumpy because my overhyped assumption of this trip ran face first into a mountain. But I'm disappointed, not disheartened. I'll find some new friends for sure. Ivy just smiled and nodded at me, and we both shared a smile. Oh look, a Pikachu, Ivy called out, and I could practically feel my neck pop as I jerked to look behind me in the direction that Ivy was looking at. There, hidden in the shadows of a tree half hidden, was not a Pikachu. A Pikachu didn't move like that. It wasn't textured like that. Its head was wrong. Its eyes weren't actually eyes. And its ears were a little crinkled. It stepped out and did a movement that made me realize one thing. It was trying to pretend to be a Pikachu, but it wasn't. It was doing a little dance. Making itself known. Attracting attention. The actions of an ambush predator, my brain noted, but ignored because my brain was far too full of what I was seeing. Mimikyu, I called out, and instantly the atmosphere changed. Its action stopped. It stilled and then its entire body jerked to focus entirely on me, with a horrid grinding that reminded me of bones grinding together. The entire forest seemed to go deathly quiet at the noise. As if everything knew what that noise meant, and hid from it. Kuakaku. It called back, and if I was any other trainer I would say the noise was almost spine-raising. A sort of unearthly grinding voice, ethereal and wrong, nothing like normal Pokemon sweetly calling out their name. Vicky? I don't think that's a Pikachu. Ivy stuttered. Yeah. It's a Mimikyu. They just pretend to be Pikachu. Hi. My name is Vicky. Do you want to be friends? I asked, and as if me responding to it was a trigger, it suddenly blurred forward. Kuyukeyuku. It cried out with a hair-raising cry as it charged, in a zigzag pattern, its eyes stars of focused intent, its shadow claws sliding out of the costume and then rocketing into the earth in a moment and pushing it up and forward. Ivy screamed out, but I was barely paying attention to her. The Mimikyu flying towards me with its dark claws raised and its twin eyes glowing stars of focused intent were taking up all of my attention. Chapter 42. Ivy. The dark foggy forest didn't seem so daunting with Vicky at her side. The blonde kept screaming into the fog and then waiting excitedly, like any moment a Mimikyu would pop out of the fog and they would be best friends forever and ever. Ivy had to admit to herself that it was actually pretty likely. Vicky just had that kind of energy. Pokemon just seemed to adore her, and she them. Well, her energy and her seemingly endless pockets full of berries. Although that didn't make this forest any less creepy. The sun was nearly down, which wasn't exactly Ivy's chosen time to wander around a forest, but Vicky had wanted to do it late at night. Better chance to find a cute Mimikyu, so she said. Ivy was mostly just wondering what she would even find in a forest this foggy, as they would all be hiding as there was no sunlight left. And Vicky was being Vicky. Mimikyu. I'm looking for a Mimikyu friend. On and on. Eventually, even Vicky stopped yelling as much as they wandered around. They weren't finding much. Most of the Pokemon that they got anywhere near fled the moment we approached too close. While they walked they talked, and things turned to Vicky's rather disappointing attempt to capture the other random Pokemon Vicky was sure she wanted, but Ivy had never even heard of. It's fine, Ivy. Honest. Vicky admitted, looking upwards. I'm just grumpy because my overhyped assumption of this trip ran face first into a mountain. But I'm disappointed, not disheartened. I'll find some new friends for sure, she said, cheering herself up. Ivy felt herself smile at Vicky's return to form. The girl never let something keep her down for long. They smiled together, sharing a look. Then, just over Vicky's shoulder, Ivy noticed it. Yellow with a particular set of ears, even if one looked crooked. A familiar silhouette after spending so much time with Ash. Oh, look, a Pikachu, she said, and instantly there was a reaction. Vicky jerked towards where she was, looking fast as lightning. Ivy didn't get it. Vicky didn't want a Pikachu. She had never shown more than passing interest in them, even if this one was acting weird. Pikachu had good ears, it should have definitely heard them, and been watching them, but instead it was doing a little hopping dance in the grass as if trying to draw in their attention. Mimikyu. Vicky breathed out a sound of shock and awe. And instantly the forest changed. Ivy felt it, as something was not right, something was suddenly pressing onto her. Then the Pikachu that was definitely not a Pikachu turned, its neck snapped, creaking at the movement, and Ivy felt her stomach do a flip. Horror at what she had just seen flowing through her. This was wrong. Wrong, 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 wrong. Kuakaku. It said. Cried. Growled. Ivy wasn't sure what to describe the noise. The grinding of souls against each other, their cries making a noise to warn away all from the terror in front of them. Ivy felt her hands reach for her pokeballs. Venusaur's ball firmly in her grip. Something was very wrong. Vicky? I don't think that's a Pikachu, she admitted, staring into the false eyes on the thing that was masquerading as a Pikachu. Made all the worse, because Ivy knew what a Pikachu looked like. Knew how they moved, and how they acted, and that thing was wrong on every level. Yeah. It's a Mimikyu. They just pretend to be Pikachu. Hi. My name is Vicky. Do you want to be friends? Vicky asked, and then, as if that triggered something, the Mimikyu moved. Kuyukeyuyuku. It called as it rushed them. Ivy saw it all. Dark shadowy claws freed from underneath. Whatever it was. Glowing bright lights appeared not from the head of the creature, but its chest. Its head somehow bending back, with a crackle of noise that still sounded like breaking bones. Then it leapt. Ivy screamed as she stumbled, back pokeball instead of throwing in between them, instead landing to the side as she jerked at the sudden motion of the Pokemon taking to the air. Venusaur. Her partner cried out, but far too late, because a moment later the Mimikyu smashed into Vicky, and Ivy jerked her eyes away, afraid she was about to see her friend's blood as those dark, evil, wicked claws hit her. Coo. It made the noise again, and Ivy simply pointed for Venusaur, but then when her partner didn't actually do anything, Ivy raised her eyes. Vicky had been knocked onto her but from the impact, but there was no blood. Instead, those ghastly arms of darkness were wrapped around her almost multiple times, clinging around her chest and pinning her arms to her sides, but Vicky wasn't in pain. She was making soothing noises with her mouth. Shoo. It's okay. Shh. She whispered aloud. Venusaur stomped to look full at what was happening, but didn't look worried. Ivy struggled to keep her eyes locked onto one thing. What was going on? What was going on? Give me a second, Ivy. I'll explain after. Vicky whispered, but never took her eyes off the. Okay, it looked like some kind of doll? It was crinkling and crackling as Vicky gently held the Pokemon to her chest, even if that was unneeded because it didn't look like it was letting go. Ivy got a chance to really look, and she was just confused. It was a Pikachu doll? Or not? Ivy rose shakily and slumped against Venusaur's hide. Venerable, she called quietly, supporting Ivy like always. I'm okay, Venusaur just. Scared and confused. Vicky didn't respond to her though. Instead, she continued to be focused on the really scary Pokemon attached to her chest. Do you want to be friends? Kuku? I mean it. I know what mimic you are. I know why you wear that costume, but it doesn't matter to me. You're special. An amazing Pokemon that deserves to have someone care about them just like all the others. So. Mimikyu? Do you want to be friends? Coo. Cuckoo. It seemed to ramble, and Vicky let out such a happy laugh that even Ivy relaxed as she snuggled up to the. It was crying? It's okay, happy tears are good too. Vicky offered, and shifted, freeing her left arm a bit to bring it up in. She rubbed at the Pokemon's chest. No, Vicky said it was a costume. There, no more tears. Let's be friends. Forever and ever. Vicky offered, and that seemed to do the opposite as it caused the Pokemon to cry even louder as it tugged her even tighter. Hee hee. This definitely made up for this entire trip. I've honestly had a rotten time, you know? She told the Pokemon, smiling brightly as she spoke. But this? Even if I don't make any more friends on this entire trip. Meeting you? Was worth it all. She then hugged the Pokemon even tighter to her chest, and both of them seemed to just luxuriate in the hug. I still have no idea what's going on. Ivy whispered, a little annoyed, even if the scene was a little sweet. She was still a little freaked out by the strangest, creepiest Pokemon she had ever seen. Some kind of zombie ghost Pikachu thing. This was so creepy. First Phantump, and now Mimikyu. If Ivy hadn't met Lucario and Riolu, and captured her own Fomantis, she would be running from this region as fast as she could, because this place was creepy. Mimikyu have to hide themselves under a costume. Vicky suddenly explained softly, eyes meeting Ivy's for just a moment, before returning to her new friend and smiling. It's not their fault. Looking at a Mimikyu straight on causes some reaction with almost everything. Some Pokemon and people have heart attacks because of it. Basically, their body is super scary. Or they just have some weird ability, I'm not actually sure. But it doesn't matter, because they really just want to be loved. It's why they dress up as Pikachu. So maybe someone will love them like they're a Pikachu. Vicky then smiled and stood up, but I don't care what costume Mimikyu wears, because I don't love the costume. I love the wonderful Pokemon inside it. Kujkuk, UK. The Pokemon started crying. From its chest. No, Ivy noticed. There were two little eye holes that the Pokemon inside was looking out from, and it was definitely where its eyes were because the streams of tears had caught even Vicky off guard as the girl desperately attempted to comfort her new Pokemon. Holding it to her chest and rocking it lightly. Of course Vicky would capture the weirdest Pokemon of all time by loving it even if it's terrifying. It reminded Ivy of Phoeba. It reminded Ivy that Vicky was the only one that knew how to evolve Phoeba into Milotic. The only one that had loved that ugly fish enough to help it evolve into the most beautiful Pokemon in the world. But that was Vicky's family secret, and she wasn't going to ever admit to knowing it. Ivy slumped back to the ground against Venusaur and decided to just relax for a bit to stop her heart from beating so hard. This was just another Vicky adventure. Mimikyu were even cuter in real life than they had been on a screen. Imagine a sort of derpy stuffed animal, ratty and worn, but desperate to be loved. I hugged my Mimikyu tighter, swearing I would fill this Pokemon with so much love, they would never worry about it again for the rest of their life. Come on, Vicky. Why don't we get out of here? It's getting cold. Ivy demanded, as the girl sat up from where she had been sitting against Venusaur, catching her breath. I sent her an apologetic look. Ivy had quite a fright. I would have too, if I wasn't already ready for it. I could feel the mixture of leaves and branches that cracked and tore whenever Mimikyu moved too fast. I would have to get them some better quality stuff soon so their costume didn't creak so much. And the shadow arms were just how they interacted with the world. But it must be really scary, seeing them flying through the air readying a glomp attack. Sure. Let me get out, Dragonite? Yeah, this forest is super creepy, I want to get out of here. Ivy said and I smiled. She had put up with enough tonight. Come on out, Dragonite. I called and she appeared with a quiet yawn as she looked around, once more shivering a bit at the cold fog, but then she looked at me, and her eyes drifted down to see Mimikyu. Drag? This is Mimikyu. My new friend. Cuckoo cuckoo. Mimikyu greeted, and Dragonite just stared for a while before slowly nodding. Drag. She said bluntly. And then turned to Ivy and offered her arms. Ah. Ivy rushed over after returning Venusaur and leapt up, and then I walked over and with a bit of work climbed onto her back. Then we were off, into the sky above the forest and free of the fog. Mimikyu tightened their grip around me at the sudden move, but I was pleased to note they didn't seem bothered by Dragonite. That was good. Only a short flight later we landed outside the cave and all of us entered checking to make sure it was still empty, which it was. Drag? Dragonite questioned, and she walked over to the fire and held her hands out over it and then looked at me. Oh sure, let's get you warmed up. It's kinda chilly. I released Arcanine with a bit of trouble. My arms were still wrapped up in Mimikyu hug that had tightened during the flight but had loosened now that we were in the cave. Arcanine? She questioned, sniffing at Mimikyu, who was only slightly turning away from me to see what Arcanine wanted. The sniffing continued and started to dip under Mimikyu's costume. Mimikyu of course didn't like that, and their wooden tail lashed out and bonked her right on the nose. Arc. She yelped in surprise, but not pain, I was relieved to note. But then she got competitive. Arc. Arc. She barked and a moment later I was nearly pulled off my feet as Arcanine reached out and bit down on Mimikyu's wood hammer. Then she decided that tug of war was the game of the night. Cuckoo. Mimikyu seemed to hiss out, but then I was dragged nearly off my feet as Arcanine decided the game was on. Arcanine. I yelped, but she didn't care, glaring into the eyes of Mimikyu who was seemingly willing to compete just as much as Mimikyu refused to let go, and so I was dragged around the cave as I couldn't compete with more than 300 pounds of world-class dog wanting to play. Help? I asked Dragonite, who just huffed and ignored my plight as Ivy had instead taken on the job of lighting the fire and was bringing it up. Ivy also just ignored me. So I was dragged around the cave, desperately fighting to stay on my feet. It had taken a lot of work to finally get Mimikyu to let go of me, so I could cook dinner, but to my happiness Arcanine's previous play had actually loosened up Mimikyu and they were currently resting on top of Arcanine's fur, seemingly quite happy by the warmth. Although their eyes never left me. And every time I looked I gave them a happy smile, which perked them up. I was gonna fill that Pokemon with so much love. Thanks Vicky. Sure Ivy, it's the least I can do after tonight. I offered, handing her a bowl of rice with a curry topping that had very little heat but would fill Ivy right up. It was what Chansey was going to eat as well. Mimikyu had a taste for spice, which made me sigh. Why did I have so many spice fiends on my team? At least it made it easier to cook. I made a big bunch of food for Arcanine and Mimikyu, which was just about finished. I hurried over and pulled it off the fire and put together a plate for Mimikyu. Mimikyu? Try this for me. Tell me if you like it, okay? I asked and they hopped off Arcanine and scurried over making me giggle as they zigzagged over and practically crawled up my arm, looking from the food to me, back to the food. Hee hee. It's okay, I make sure all my friends get to eat. It's spicy, so tell me if you like it, okay? Coo. Cuckoo. They responded back as they dug in, their costume basically landing on top of it. I held everything steady as I let Mimikyu eat the food. A moment later they pulled away and the plate was completely sparkling clean. Kekukukukaku, kukuk okukeukeoku, uk. They suddenly burst into speech, practically vibrating as their shadow hands slipped out and grabbed into my arm. I guess that means you liked it. I confirmed and the Pikachu head flopped up and down in rapid fire, cracking each and every time. I noticed it made Ivy flinch at the noise. I'm glad. I said simply, as I put the plate down and gave Mimikyu a nice big hug. Want to hang out with me while I feed the rest? I asked and got another spine-crunching head nod. So I just lifted them up to my shoulder and let them get settled in, clinging on with Shadow Claw. As I rose up and hummed a song as I got Arcanine's meal ready. Mimikyu snuggled up to my cheek the whole time. After dinner, I settled into my sleeping bag with a still clingy Mimikyu to do some settling of everything. Okay, so. Like I said, my name is Vicky. Victoria Ferrous. I'm from Viridian City in the Kanto region, which is super far to the south. Cuckoo? Yeah. I'm here to make new friends. You being the first. I added, unable to resist reaching down to Mimikyu, who was settled in my lap, to pet up and down their side. Cuckoo. Yeah. It's amazing. I'm so happy I found you. But I should explain what I am doing, because while I'm happy if you stay with me forever, there are some options you can choose from. Also, I have some questions too. So I'm going to do this. I reached out with both my hands and placed them in front of Mimikyu. So we are going to play a game of questions so we can get to know each other and we can both be on the same page. Mimikyu nodded as they tilted their head a bit at my hands, wondering what I was getting at. Very cute. The costume head tilted with them and it was pretty cute. The crackling bone snapping sound, not so much, but the uncomfortable feeling was also part of their cute point. So first off, are you a boy or a girl? I moved my hand showing that left was boy and right was girl. Coo? Then Mimikyu's shadow hand reached out and touched my left. A boy. How nice. I said, smiling. Okay, so next question. I'm a Pokemon trainer. That means I train Pokemon to be as strong as they can and battle them against others. To grow stronger, to protect the things I care about. Sometimes just to get back at people that are mean. I battle for all sorts of reasons. Do you want to be one of my Pokemon that battles with me? Or not? Instantly, Mimikyu grabbed onto my right and tugged it up and down. Battling it was, but I had to be sure. Are you sure? You'll still be my friend even if you don't battle for me. I don't want you to chew, okay? I stopped as I was interrupted as Mimikyu practically leapt onto my right hand and jumped up and down. Alright. Battles it is. In that case, let's grab a Pokeball. Do you know what a Pokeball is? I asked, and to my surprise, he nodded up and down. A moment later, I pulled out one of my premier balls and held it between my hands. This is a premier ball. I like them more than the normal ones. So I use them as my special Pokeballs. All of my battle Pokemon go into premier balls. So, Mimikyu, will you join me? And before I could finish, he pressed himself into the Pokeball and he disappeared into light. The Pokeball only rang a single time before locking in. I felt my smile stretching across my face as I released him and he came out in a cry and then leapt at me a big hug. I'm happy for you, Vicky. Ivy offered, although she didn't sound very happy. Thanks, Ivy. I've wanted to make friends with a Mimikyu forever. I admitted, and Ivy frowned for a second before shrugging. You always had weird taste. But I guess now that we aren't in a foggy forest, he is kinda cute. A little. She admitted. Which she quickly learned was a mistake. Mimikyu shifted, his neck snapping as he locked onto Ivy, who flinched at the sudden attention. Coo. He cried out as suddenly he leapt at her. I hummed as I ignored Ivy's scream as Mimikyu smacked into her chest and wrapped her up in a hug. Her surprised eyes went from him to me. I just sent her a smile and a thumbs up. Great job, Ivy. Really building up my newest little buddy's confidence. This time for sure. I called out the next morning. Hat on head. Mimikyu on my shoulder. Finally, a Pokemon small and cute enough to carry around. I was always the one carried around by my Pokemon. I finally got to enjoy the Pokemon trainer dream. Sure, Mimikyu wasn't cuddly if you touched him under his costume. He felt more like cold, not quite wet, nothingness as his body wrapped around my hand, for instance. When I had cuddled him in the night. But that was a-okay. Better than any Pikachu. Oh. I couldn't wait until I ran into Ash again. Wahahaha. I had the best shoulder Pokemon now. Cuckoo? Sorry, I just laugh at things that amuse me. Also, I love that you are here. I told him, earning a wiggling motion that was probably a blush from my newest friend. Cute. I proclaimed, earning more wiggles. I continued to ignore the bone-cracking noise he made as he shifted. I set off. Once more for the gummy pool. I was going to seduce them with berries. I was sure of it. Mimikyu was my partner today, so we could get some more time together, and honestly, it was kinda weird having a Pokemon so small with me. I mean, Arcanine was one of my smallest Pokemon. And she was a 300+ pound dog. Carrying around Mimikyu, who felt almost weightless, was so nice. Cuckoo? So there's a pool of gummy that I found. I wanted to offer them all to come with. I think gummy are great, and I wanted to bring all of them that wanted to come with me back to Kanto. But I scared them. It made me really sad. I trailed off, taking comfort in Mimikyu's presence. I had made a new friend. I could do it again. But that wasn't a failure. Not really. You only fail when you give up. I proclaimed happily, Mimikyu raising up his woodhammer tail alongside me in support. I love shoulder Pokemon. Chapter 43. Sneaking through the bushes that led to the clearing full of gummy, I peered out and was shocked at what I saw. Nothing. No delightful little gooey boys. Cuckoo? Mimikyu whispered right into my ear, a spine-tingling sound. But to me, it was cute. They were here last time. They probably just went home. I stood up, brushing out my hat from some of the leaves I had moved through, before thinking better of it and grabbing leaves from the bushes and piling them into my hat. Cuckoo? Gummy eat leaves. So I figure I can give them a treat. They seemed to like these bushes last time I saw them. I explained, and Mimikyu nodded his costume head up and down in understanding. Then, to my surprise, his claw reached out and grabbed a few leaves and dumped them into the hat as well. He wanted to help. I smiled happily, and when my hat was full, I made sure to reach up and nudge him into my cheek for a bit of skinship. Thanks, Mimikyu. Cuckoo. He seemed to stutter, and I giggled at his awkward flailing. The creak snap of his costume was ignored. When we got home, I'd find him some supplies to get rid of that. It was kinda loud. Then I walked through the forest. Pokemon all around, but they left me alone. No packs of Poochyena this time. But as I drew close to the cave that the gummy had come from, I heard it. The sounds of battle. Hold on. I grunted as I raced forward, uncaring that some of the leaves were left behind. I came out of the trees and stilled. There in front of the little was a gummy, dirty and tattered and using every ounce of his strength. Because in front of him was an Ekans. It was a minor thought, but I remember that one of the animals that would eat slugs back on Earth were snakes. Mimikyu. Shadowclaw. I called out without hesitation. Mimikyu leapt from my shoulder with a cry. Cuckoo. It roared and its claw came out in a blaze of darkness, but unlike last time I had seen him leap in the air, claws outstretched. This time it was an attack. The blow struck the Ekans that had instantly turned its head towards me at my yell. Giving me enough time to notice that the Ekans was uninjured despite the single gummy desperately trying to hold it back from entering their little cave. I ignored that though. Instead, rushing straight for the injured Pokemon. Baseball sliding, I quickly grabbed my belt. But before I could throw out Chansey, I was surprised. Jigu. The gummy responded to my presence with a tackle attack. Slamming into my stomach and knocking the breath out of me even if it didn't hurt more than that. Arms came forward and instead of pulling out Chansey, I simply hugged the poor Pokemon to me. Mostly so he couldn't hurt himself anymore. It's okay. I'm not gonna hurt you. I promise. I'm here to help. Jigu. It gave out a muffled grunt, but it was tired and hurt and couldn't possibly resist my secret move. Let's snuggle forever wasn't just a Mimikyu Z move. Cuckoo. I looked up to see the Ekans in full retreat sliding through a bush and Mimikyu hurrying over. Can you go into my bag? I asked him, and he tilted his costume head and nodded. Second inside pocket on the right, the one with the zipper. That's it. The potion? It's a spray bottle. purplish liquid. And he pulled it free. My smile of thanks almost had my poor Mimikyu melt into a puddle. That's the one. Here, can you spray it on him? Perfect, just like that. I said, guiding Mimikyu, who sprayed the potion over the gummy that was actually pretty hard to hold, but I was succeeding mostly by being a lot healthier than the poor little guy. Finally, I loosened up and Gummy was revealed to be in much better condition than he had been before. He looked up at me with his tiny little eyes and glared. At least I think it was a glare, it was mostly just cute. Feeling okay? Goo. He retaliated by smacking into my face with a tackle. Between his gooey form and his own tiredness, it didn't hurt too bad, but did send me crashing onto my back as he sort of blooped off me and landed on the ground. That was a little mean, but I get it. I muttered, rising up and rubbing at my now slimed face. A little gross, but I'd deal. Are you okay? Goo. He demanded and woogled his way to stand between me and the cave entrance. There he glared. This Gummy. He or she, I realized I wasn't sure. But they were perfect. So fierce. A fierce little slime dragon. Wanted to hug them tight, and feed them leaves and berries, and praise their bravery. Instead, I took a deep breath and slowly got up and moved a few steps away. Carefully disengaging. Okay. We aren't here to hurt you. See? We are moving away from the cave. Not gonna hurt you or your friends. See, look? I pointed at my hat that had a bunch of leaves surrounding it despite my abandoning it. I brought you some food because I wanted to meet with you. Goo. They. I think roared would be the best description, but it was so cute I couldn't think of it as fearsome. Okay. See, I'll listen. I'm not gonna hurt you. I whispered calmly, moving further back, even leaving my hat on the ground still covered in leaves as I backed away slowly. The clearing was quiet for a little while Mimikyu climbed back up onto my shoulder. I gently pet him in thanks, but never took my eyes off the bravest Gummy who was focused on me. Then far enough, I slowly sat down, legs crossed and waited. Goo. Nope. I answered back calmly. I'm not leaving, but I'm not going to hurt you. I just want to talk. Goo. The little slime ball growled cutely, and then to my surprise behind the little goo ball, another one poked its head out. Goom. Goo. Goomy. The brave one turned and called back to the others, and they listened, sliding back into the shadows of their little cave. The Gummy spun back to me, but I hadn't moved. Calmly I reached into my backpack and I noticed the poor thing twitch, but instead of what they must have expected, I pulled out a pecha berry and took a nibble. Peeling a section off, I offered it to Mimikyu, where it quickly vanished beneath his costume. Want some? I offered, and Gummy just glared, and I nodded. Too soon still. So I just settled in. Today was the day after all. This hadn't gone how I wanted, but I could figure it out. First, I just needed to get the Gummy to calm down. So I nibbled on the berry and just waited. Slowly, even the fiercest of Gummy grew tired of watching me calmly eat. He bravely moved over to me, his little face glaring, and came up short, puffing himself up again, but I didn't react, run away, or attack. Just gave it a bit of time for him to deflate. You want some? I offered, and they sort of wiggled and blew itself back up, making them look big. Goom. Yeah. You're very brave and strong. I agreed, and that only made it puff up a little larger before it sort of deflated. Want some water? I offered, and Gummy perked up at that, but then shook itself as if fighting back its own wants. Goom. It denied with a cute little wiggle shake. Well, okay, but I'm going to get my water out. I mentioned casually, as I reached into my bag and slowly brought out the canteen. It was still glaring as I stuffed the pecha berry into my mouth to hold it, and uncapped the canteen, then casually appended it gently on top of their head. Oops. I said very fakely. As I pulled the berry free from my mouth. Pretty much instantly, despite being a grumpy little Gummy, it preened under the water. Its coloring changed as it grew damp. I hadn't even realized the poor guy was a little gray. Goom. He said after I cut off the flow of water, and then he did a cute little shake, but none of the water really escaped him. Despite rolling down his body, it was all very quickly absorbed. Then before anything else could be said, a tiny bit of the pechaberry was poked right into his little mouth area. He did a wobble. Then sort of took in the flavor before perking up. "Goo!" he exclaimed, and I grinned and offered him the rest. My palm was gobbled up as he grabbed it, then backed off to happily chew the treat. Haha. Success. I went to put my chin in my hands, before wincing at the slime on my palm touching my chin. A moment of wiping my hand clean on my pants, and a bit of rubbing my chin into the opposite shoulder from Mimikyu, who was still quietly watching all of this happen. "Do you like pechaberries?" I asked, and Gummy, probably without even realizing it, nodded happily as he chewed the berry. How cute! Then he realized who he had been responding to, and did a cute little jump back as he glared at me, while still eating the berry. I of course had the perfect solution for this. I pulled out another pechaberry. Well, a small chunk of one. The berries were pretty big actually. "Goo?" he gasped, tiny eyes never leaving the berry as I waved it around. "I suppose I could give you another one," I offered, and he hesitated, looking at me with suspicion. But then I just broke into a smile, 'cause he was too cute to hold out on, and I placed it down in front of him. Then I grabbed another berry and gave it to Mimikyu. He was being so amazing, not causing any trouble or anything, and I really appreciated his presence. Also, shoulder Pokemon. "Thanks, Mimikyu," I said aloud, just so he could know how much I appreciated him. "Kekuu," he said, sounding shy, but it was cute. Gummy was a little startled, but calmed down as he was still chowing down on the berry. "So want to share some berries with your friends?" I asked, and Gummy stilled as he seemed to realize he had eaten the whole thing. "Goo. Gummy goo," he said while doing another little leap back as he had come closer to get the berry. I wasn't exactly sure what he meant, but I just shrugged. "How about I just give you some berries? It doesn't have to be me giving them one directly." I reached into my bag and pulled out a handful of different berry types and offered them, but there was a problem. Gummy had no hands. He looked from berries to me, then to his friends that were not hiding as well as they should, peering out more and more to see what was going on. "I'm not going to hurt you or your friends. I think Gummy are great," I explained, and I waited. Then slowly, the protective instinct of the Gummy was overcome. Slowly, he wiggled back, but not to run or anything, but telling me to follow with a movement of his head. I didn't cheer, because that might startle him. So I rose up and even stopped to gather up my hat and a bunch of the leaves. Then I followed him towards the cave entrance. He planted himself right at the entrance, looking brave and strong as I approached, and even puffed up as I started getting too close. So I settled on the spot close enough and placed my hat on the ground, and started parceling out the meal. A leaf with a berry bit on top set out close to the bravest Gummy, who watched over me with a firm will, only allowing some minor distraction from the berries. But soon more Gummy were woogling out of the cave and giving happy cries of delight once they bit into the berry. Well, after a bit of scared inching closer and closer, poor Gummies were scared of me. I would just have to shower them with love and affection. I even reached back into my bag for my canteen, and started pouring a bit of water on each of the Gummy in range, perking them all up each time. Soon even the bravest Gummy had fallen prey to my wiles and was snacking on a delicious berry. I sat there, surrounded by slimes. Queen of the slimes. Queen of everything. Goo. The noise escaping the little Gummy I was playing with was the best thing ever. Eventually, as I fed and watered the Gummies, they had relented and started actually relaxing. Mimikyu had even taken to relaxing, as he was currently hiding under my hat, and cute little noises kept creeping out that were his little snores. I mean, sure, it kinda sounded like screams of the dam echoing from far away, but he was just snoring, so that was cute. But more importantly, I had a Gummy in my hands. Pushing both hands up against the Gummy's cheeks, I then lifted, watching his body stretch out, earning me a happy little noise as they slowly stretched back out until they were touching the floor, and then I just let go, and their whole body flumped back together to the sound of giggles. They liked it. With the assurance they liked me playing with them, I picked it back up and started moving it from hand to hand, letting it basically fall into the lower hand, before switching it up and letting it slide to the other. The absolute delightful giggling laugh filled the clearing, telling me I had found the perfect game for Gummy. And for me, it reminded me of all those slime toys I had seen when I was a kid in my last life. What was it called again? GAC? GAC? Something like that. Only this was a living creature, and it responded and giggled as you played with it. Awesome. Goom. The brave Gummy called out a warning, and all the Goomies started rushing into the cave. The one in my hand struggled against me, and I quickly placed it down so it could run as well. I looked to where Gummy was looking and locked eyes with something I wasn't expecting. The one forest creature I didn't expect. Human. He wore similar enough clothes to the Kitakami residents I had talked with. So I casually brushed off the slime from my hands and rose up. I felt myself falling into a glare though, because around his neck there was a very familiar Ekans. With the snake around him, and his general scowl, he didn't look very kind. It was hard to tell his exact age. The teenager was probably 16? Maybe 20? He was covered in mud and other stuff, coating some of his skin, making it hard to really figure him out. And then he got really close and I instantly stepped back and coughed. Repel. The boy was coated in repel, and I knew why Pokemon avoided it. It stunk like distilled mook, yet not as toxic. Outsider. Hi. I gasped out as I plugged my nose and leaned away. The boy scoffed at my actions. I don't know why you are playing with such filthy creatures, but move aside. I've been tracking this nest for days. He demanded, and I blinked. Are you talking about the Gummy? I asked, watching as the boy's brown eyebrows cinched down into a glare. What else would I be talking about besides those little plague monsters? He asked but shook his head. I heard from the elders you are on some strange journey. It seems stupid for you to be running around this forest alone, so I'll warn you now. Powerful Pokemon roam the forests. You should leave before you get attacked and killed. He offered, not entirely unkindly. I cocked my head and just nodded slowly. Yeah, I know. The powerful Pokemon are why I'm here. I'm actually trying to make friends with the Gummy, but you scared them off. Friends? Those things carry the worst of diseases and plagues. You should kill them whenever you see them. It's the only way to keep the crops from dying. I had a lot of doubts about what this guy just said, but arguing with someone as a 10-year-old was kind of an uphill battle. But it was obvious this guy was serious. I'm not from around Kitakami, so I don't really know your history and things. But Gummy are pretty nice. They aren't exactly aggressive. I'm Sue Dash. What does that have to do with anything? If they aren't poisoning the water, they are eating the crops, devouring the leaves right off the trees until they die. I blinked and felt my eyes narrow, because Gummy weren't really good climbers. Everything I've seen from them showed they tended to eat leaves near the base of things like bushes, not really climbing up trees. He shook his head. It doesn't matter. Move aside. It's time to kill this nest and dash. This time it was me who cut him off. I moved to stand directly in front of the nest and glared with all my might. You'll have to go through me if you even hope to lay a finger on them. I threatened, and like clockwork it was decided. He reached for his belt, pulling a pokeball from it, and then I was about to do the same, but I already had a Pokemon out. Mimikyu had stopped his snoring and I could tell my hat where it was sitting on the floor was focused on the threat. The teenager, seeing my hesitation, must have thought he had won. Go. Snorant. He called out, and I blinked at the ice type as it materialized. That Snorant weren't exactly known for being powerful. Powdered snow. Show this outsider the power of Kitakami. Before I could even call out an order, well, my hat moved from where it had been laying on the ground. In a quick zigzag, Mimikyu raced towards the Snorant, which yelped, shifting the attack and blasting my hat, which was instantly pelted by snow and then even started freezing up, but that caused the hat to go flying and then it revealed Mimikyu unharmed underneath. Heh. Mimikyu used disguise. On top of its disguise. Monster. The teenager yelped, and then did something I really didn't expect. He threw something that made a rattling noise. It distracted Mimikyu for a moment as he stopped to figure out what was going on, and then the teenager returned his Pokemon and raced towards me. I yelped, but instead of attacking, he grabbed me, lifting me entirely off my feet, throwing me over his shoulder and tried to run. Let go. I yelped as I kicked him, making him drop me, and then I fell into a ninja roll and ended up back on my feet. Fine. Die then. He yelped and then just took off. Like really fast. I turned back to Mimikyu, who was halfway away from where the object thrown by the teenager had landed on me. Ah. He had raced to come save me. Thanks, Mimikyu. I called out, arms open. Cuckoo. Cuckoo. He cried out and smashed into me, as I giggled as his shadow claw wrapped around me. Such a good boy. Thank you for protecting me. My shirt got a little wet from the crying. But that was okay. Instead, I walked over to the object that was thrown. It kinda looked like a stick figure man. It was a bunch of weird pieces of wood wrapped together as well. I bent down and picked it up, and I noticed it made a cracking noise that was very, very familiar. Ah. It's what you use to make the neck of your costume stand up. That's why it crackles. I called out, and Mimikyu gave a little nod of his costume at my words, in fact making the noise. A moment later he pointed at it with his claw, which was easy enough for me to understand. I handed it over, watching as it disappeared underneath his costume, and I could hear the crackling noise erupt out. That's so weird. Why did he throw that? Just as a distraction? Was he just walking around with one in his pocket? I wondered, staring out towards where the teenager had disappeared. At least the repel isn't stinking up the whole place anymore. I decided and instead headed towards the cave entrance. There the bravest Gummy was holding the entrance. Shaking and shivering, but not from fear. It was cold. The powdered snow had landed all over the clearing and dragons were weak to ice. Are you cold? I asked, and got. Well, if it had teeth, I think they would be chattering. Arcanine. You're up. Sorry, girl. I just need a heater again. I called out as Arcanine materialized, and Arcanine slumped as she looked around for a battle. She sent me a look of puppy dog eyes, but I just smiled and pointed towards Gummy. The Gummy who was now stock still as he stared up and up at the very large Pokemon in his clearing. Then Arcanine sighed and burst into flame. The chill of the snow vanished and very swiftly, the snow along with it. In fact, as the snow cleared and became water, Gummy relaxed and even wandered over to a small puddle and took a drink. Goo. Gummy goo. He called out to Arcanine to my surprise, and she barked, then lowered her nose and started sniffing. After a few moments, she gave Gummy a big lick that stretched out his whole body. Then to my amusement Arcanine gave a look even on a dog I could recognize. Oh shit, I fucked up. Was pretty universal. She started jawing, licking wildly, but I could see the very amusing problem. There was slime in her mouth. And it was a bit sticky. I giggled, because it was absolutely hilarious. Once I was able to look at her and not start laughing, I called her over and spent a minute with my hand in her mouth wiping slime away. Chapter 44. Arcanine degooed, now back in her pokeball, I faced the Gummy horde. There were a bunch of them, and more were poking their heads out from around the little cave entrance. The bravest one was looking up at me, and for once I actually really liked the look on its face. It wasn't scared. I kneeled down and then sat in front of it. So that's why you guys are scared of humans, huh? I asked, and got a nod from the little blob. I nodded at that and sighed, settling Mimikyu in my lap. There was still a crackling noise inside the costume as Mimikyu shorted up with the new material. More Gummy were coming out as I watched. The fear of me was gone, and instead was interest. I guess saving them from a bad human would give me a little more credit. But I was still frowning. If I left. When I left, he would be back. That kid. The hunter with the Eakins, and the Snorant. He's gonna come back. I said, and brave Gummy puffed up while the others flinched back. Yeah. That's what I was afraid of. You're very brave. You do a great job protecting your friends. But even if you beat him, he'll just come back with more Pokemon. I added, and Brave slowly deflated before my eyes. They nodded and then called out. Goom. Gummy goo. And all the Gummy deflated. Instantly I noticed the change. They started moving. More and more gummy started coming out of the cave, all slowly lining up with the others. I recognized what this was. A migration. Brave had figured it out. The only way to survive would be to leave and find a new home. No, I answered, as much as I had wanted to capture all of the gummy, or at least all that wanted to come with. It felt wrong to do it like this. So I would have to handle this very, very well. For my own morals. Listen. I live in a place super far away from here. It's called Kanto, and we don't have any gummy. None. Not a one. I said, attracting some attention, as I spoke loudly, but I was mostly speaking to Brave. Goom? Brave asked, but I couldn't tell exactly what the question was. So I reached into my bag and pulled out something very slowly and carefully, and placed it on the ground. I want to help you. All of you. Gummy are friends. You aren't dangerous, and it's wrong to hurt you. I can help. Please let me help. I can take all of you out of Kitakami, all the way to Kanto. I have a stable, a place that's just for me to keep my Pokemon. It's safe and warm, with a big river. I can bring all of you there. And release you. You can live there safely. No more hunters trying to hurt you. Or even Pokemon trying to eat you. It'll be safe, and I'll make a cave just for you, where you can eat all the leaves you want, and play in the water with the Milotic that live there already. I then reached into my backpack, into the pocket that I stored my Pokeballs, and started just pouring them out. See? Each Pokeball can take a gummy, and I can transport you safely. No dangerous travel to find a new home. It'll be perfectly safe. You just have to trust me. Then I just waited, staring into the eyes of dozens of gummy, some so tiny they were carried by the bigger ones. Cute. Goom. Brave Gummy responded, sounding pretty negative, and I took that and nodded. I know. Listen. You don't really know me. We've only just met. I haven't earned that level of trust yet. But I want to help you. I actually came to Kitakami, to this land. I added, waving around when I noticed their confused looks at the name. I came here to meet Gummy and bring some of you back with me. But I'll bring you all if you want. No limits. I got tons of these. I added, gesturing at the rolling around Pokeballs. Goom. Gummy gummy? The question, to my surprise, wasn't at me. KKK cuckoo cuckoo. Mimikyu answered back from my lap, and I don't think the answer really satisfied the gummy. Maybe a good judge of my character? Come on out, Milotic. And Milotic appeared around me, already half wrapping me up as he hovered off the ground around me and then arched his neck down, and I gave him a big hug as he nuzzled me back. Milo. Hi, partner. Can you help? The gummy are in trouble. I want to help. Me, Milotic, me. He trilled and looked at the gummy. Then they started talking. Milotic's trilling call was matched by not just Brave, but lots of little gummy voices. Some sounded very depressed as they called out to Milotic. But I had faith. My partner was a total Chad, and there wasn't a Pokemon alive that he couldn't seduce. Milo. Milotic finally spoke, not to the gummy, but to me. Rubbing his cheek with mine a bit. Thanks, partner. So how about it? Gummy. All of you? Will you take a risk and come with me? Or take a risk and head out into the wilds to find a new home? I asked, and the gummy collectively seemed to turn to each other to ask themselves just that. Finally, Brave Gummy slid forward and called out. Gummy. Goo. I'm sorry, I didn't understand. I replied because it sounded serious, but the clarity wasn't there. Goom. Gummy goo. He puffed himself up, and then the gummy moved. Each one slid over towards a Pokeball, and slowly poked it. Zip. Chime. Zip. Chime. Zip. Chime. On and on it went, until there weren't any Pokeballs to slide into. I quickly grabbed my bag to pour out more. Even holding some out to Gummy to help capture them one by one. Until finally, it was just me and Brave. Brave, who looked up at me and moved towards a Pokeball. But I stopped it. grabbing the Pokeball before it could. Hold on. I have. Do you want to be one of my Pokemon? I asked, and Gummy sort of looked at me like it didn't understand. Right, details. So. I'll take all of you to my stable, where you can live however you all want, but I'm a Pokemon trainer. I catch Pokemon to train them to become strong. So will you be one of my team members? You'll travel with me, and train and do lots of adventures. And I promise you'll get strong. I'll help you evolve. The forest was quiet as I offered the premier ball to Brave, and a moment later the noise echoed out. Zip. Chime. But the premier ball in my hand was empty. Me? My shoulders slumped. I'm sure at least one of them will want to get trained up and be my friend. I responded, and Milotic leaned over and rubbed his head on top of mine. It was comforting, but kinda annoying, because I had really wanted a goo dragon. Kukukukuku. Mimikyu called out from my lap. The first time in a while, the Pokemon had said anything. I looked down into his little eye holes, and I saw sympathy and worry in equal measures. Oh, don't you worry at all, Mimikyu. I said, reaching down and pulling him into a hug. Just because I want to add more Pokemon to my team doesn't do anything to change your position in it. We're friends now. Forever and ever. I told him and giggled as once again my shirt started getting wet from happy Mimikyu tears. So this hadn't gone entirely how I wanted. That's okay. I had a whole horde of Gummy to take home with me. They would love the stable land, and I would play with them, and eventually one will become my newest bestie. Yeah. Vicky made lots of new friends today. They just don't know it. I called out, and Milotic laughed at me, but was nice enough to help me gather up all the Pokeballs, which I quickly organized in my bag between occupied or empty. All right. Let's go. I decided, rising up, but I wonder what's in the cave. I muttered and looked towards the Gummy cave entrance. Milo? Yeah, it's a bit big for you, buddy. But it's time to explore. Me, he agreed, rubbing me once more, and then I pushed the Pokeball to his snout. Once he disappeared, I gave his Pokeball a squeeze, and stood up. Come on, Mimikyu. Let's look around. Kukuku. I slid onto my belly, and with a bit of finagling managed to slip into the dark cave. Unfortunately, it was dark, and I didn't have a flashlight on me. With a bit of grumbling, I found what I could use in my bag. A lighter. Something I didn't use much. It was a campfire lighter, but I just used Arcanine. With a click the light came on, and if I hadn't known it was a Gummy cave I would have shuddered. Everything was coated with goo. Cuckoo. Mimikyu seemed far less enthused about the cave as he looked around and even flinched as a drop of slime slipped down and almost landed on his costume. Want to stick to your Pokeball? Kukuku. He refused instantly, and I smiled at his obvious attachment. Okay, how about you just hang out in here? I offered, lifting up my hat, and a moment later he was stuffing his costume up into the hat and then settling in on top of my head. I could feel his weird body slipping into my hair a bit to hold on, but it wasn't painful, and the scritching feeling was kinda nice actually. Okay, let's go. I started crawling further in. So it turns out the reason the Gummy picked this cave wasn't just because of the small entrance. Nice. I whispered quietly. On the other side of the tunnel, that was definitely formed by a Pokemon. Probably a Geodude, or a Graveler or something, as it was only a few feet wide and a few feet high. But enough I could crawl through without too much trouble. Even rise up to my feet if I crouched real low. But at the end, it connected to another tunnel. The reason the Gummy had used it was revealed. The exit was high up on the wall of a much larger cave. The exit showed slimy Gummy trails up and down the rock face because at the bottom was a small pond. The water dripped down from above and formed a cave pool. It was only a foot or so deep at the maximum, but it was perfect for Gummy. Just not a good place to eat. With a bit of work, I climbed down from the Gummy entrance high up the wall, slipping and sliding down. Okay, I'll need to get some help to get back up there. I muttered as I looked up at the hole that was 6 or so feet above my head along the absolutely slime-coated wall. I shrugged. I had Pokemon that could help. Instead, I turned around and looked around at the cave I found myself in. My little lighter, barely giving me the light to see the other side. Cool, I said, and my voice echoed. Echo. I listened as my voice repeated over and over and over. Ski, ski, ski. The noise struck me back, echoing through the cave with a force I could almost feel. It was a noise I recognized. Ah. My old nemesis. I whispered as I fingered a pokeball. Go Arcanine. Blaze a trail. I called out. Now that I was out of the tiny gummy tunnel, the cave was much larger, and as the horde of Zubat approached, they were struck by a fur missile. I hadn't actually done much exploring in caves in this life, but I remembered how often these damn bats ruined my journey through MT Moon in the games. Okay Chansey, you are up. Let's heal them up and remind them to calm down. Arcanine. I could use some light. Let's explore. I giggled as I got happy tail wags and a little Chansey gasp as she ran around and started healing up the Zubats. Time to see where this cave takes me. I am a bit lost, I told Arcanine, who was just as turned around as I was. We had even tried to use her nose to go back towards the gummy tunnel, but had gotten a bit turned around again. Luckily, I wasn't really that worried. I could always capture a native Pokemon and have them lead me out or something. Besides, it was kind of fun. When I wasn't just staring at a crossroads I was pretty sure I had seen before. Do you think these tunnels are all just Golem or Graveler just wandering around? I asked Arcanine, and she shrugged at me. Yeah, I figured as well. Okay, let's try. That way? Arc. She agreed, and off we went. I was actually walking mostly because Arcanine's speed and low ceilings make for a dangerous combination. Cuckoo-cuck. Mimikyu spoke from under my hat and I nodded. He sounded a little depressed. It's okay. Just because you don't know these caves isn't a bad thing, I assured him, and he went back to worming his way into my hair some more as we walked. Huh. Oh. Look, sunlight. I called out happily. Far in the distance, I could see the bright light of the sun. I broke into a jog, Arcanine practically dancing around me as she wanted nothing more than to just take off full speed, but she kept close and I huffed a bit despite all my fitness training. Jogging what I realized uphill was a bit of a workout. Finally we broke out of the cave and I gasped. We were pretty far up the mountain, and on the north side instead of the east. That's the Barrens over there, I said, as I looked over the plantless area on the northern side of the mountain. Large rock outcroppings covered it, giving it a very different look to any other section of Kitakami. I stretched and winced as the cool air of the mountain ran over my still rather gooey clothes. Okay. It's time for a clean-up. Mimikyu, can you hold on to my hat and bag over here? I asked as I walked over to a rock. It took a few moments, but slowly Mimikyu untangled himself from my hair and he hopped off, landing on the rock with my big hat still hanging out on top of his disguise. I giggled as it looked rather silly. Thanks Mimi, I said, dropping my bag next to him. Coo. Coo. I smiled at his happy answer and quickly checked myself over. Nothing in my pockets that would get bothered by the water. With that, it was time for a bit of cleanup. Milotic. Quick wash. I called out, walking far enough away Mimikyu wouldn't get bothered, and then I was soaked as Milotic appeared in light all around me, and used surf to just absolutely swamp me in water. I held my breath as he spun around the water, making a whirlpool of water that helped rub all the goo off. Then it was over and the water flowed away. It would have pulled me right off my feet if Milotic hadn't wrapped around me, holding me in place. Phew. That's always a rush, I called out, and Milotic trilled happy back at me. We threw each other big smiles. Cuckoo? Mai. Milo. Milotic called out, looking towards Mimikyu and floating over, giving my new friend a greeting. They both got into a conversation that I wasn't able to follow, but Milotic was being nice and friendly at least. Okay Arcanine. Spin dry special. Arc. A minute later I was patting myself down, making sure I wasn't on fire anywhere, and then I nodded to Arcanine. Good job. She gave me a doggy smile and her tail wagged a bit behind her. With that done, Well, I had to figure out what to do next. I should go back and see Ivy soon, but more importantly, since I was already up here, do you think we can find some gibble up here? I muttered and looked around. The cave hadn't been exactly full of interesting Pokemon. In fact, besides Zubat, it had been almost completely barren. Only a few Geodude hiding in the ground had caught my eye. Milotic. Return. Mimikyu. You want to? Oh, fair enough. I said as Mimikyu had leapt at me, landing on my head and instantly worming his way back into my hair. My bag landing in my hands that I quickly threw over my shoulder. We were free of that cave, so that only meant one thing. More Pokemon. More friends. Let's try going higher. Arcanine. Up the mountain. I called out, finally freeing my girl from her restraints as I jumped on. I could feel Mimikyu jerk a bit, wondering what was going on, and then Arcanine threw herself forward. Ku. Mimikyu cried out as he held on to my hair as the wind battered my hat, and Arcanine rushed practically straight up the mountain, jumping from rock outcropping to outcropping until we finally found a section of the mountain that was flatter. Arc. She cheered as she landed, strutting around a bit as if she had just won a contest or something. Silly dog. I told her and rubbed her mane, but then I had to focus on my other Pokemon. You okay, buddy? I asked, and my hat just shuddered, and I could feel Mimikyu worming his way through my hair, trying to tighten down. Hey, it's okay. We stopped. I said, but he certainly wasn't letting go. Arc. Arcanine called out, and I looked up to see she was calling out at the Piloswine that were staring at us, backing up against a small pack of Swinub. Urge to pet piglets. Rising. But no, they were scared. Sorry to bother you. We are just passing through. I called out calmly, and even patted Arcanine on the back to get her to relax. She had shifted into battle mode the moment she saw Pokemon. Not because she was worried about attacks, but because she wanted to play. Pipilo. Piloswine. Okay. It's okay. We aren't going to touch you or your Swinub. Honest. We will just go right up that way, okay? Nothing to fear from us. And Arcanine sighed at the lack of battle and switched to pouting mode and walked up the flat path that spiraled around this section of the mountain. The Pokemon thankfully started to relax. But since I was here, you wouldn't happen to know where the Gibblegabite or Garchomp lived, do you? I called out, and all of the Pokemon surprised me by nearly leaping into the air. Instantly, they circled around, gathering up the Swinub, and faced outward, looking as if they were ready for a battle. I mean, sure, they were ice types, but Garchomp are Garchomp, and Gibble are Gibble, and probably try to take a bite even if they are weak to them. I waited a minute as even Arcanine was interested, and slowly the Piloswine seemed to relax. Sorry. I didn't mean to startle you. I'm looking for them, and if you know where they might be? The Pokemon didn't seem at all interested in helping me after their scare, but one of the Piloswine stepped out and then turned upwards, pointing its snout. Pilo. It offered, and then gathered back together with its little pack. I guess that was my answer. You heard them, Arcanine. We need to go that way. I pointed up and more towards the western side of the mountain. And a moment later we were gone, leaving the cute little piglets in our dust. And poor Mimikyu once more struggled to stay stuck to my head. We raced around. Plenty of Pokemon were passed by in a flash, although the density of the Pokemon we saw started to dramatically slim down as we reached the western side of the mountain. Something I noticed with pleasure, because I was pretty sure I knew why. Garchomp were always considered a pretty aggressive Pokemon. I mean, anytime a wild Garchomp were shown in the anime, they had always been these absolute beasts, wrecking everything around them. Even powerful ice types. Wasn't it one of the Hisui promotions that showed that? I think it was an Alpha Garchomp that time. I shook it off, and instead had Arcanine start guiding us. Her sniffer once more coming in handy. Being so familiar with dragon types, I didn't think it would take us too long to find our quarry. Although that wasn't quite right. Turns out, they found us first. Arcanine was leaping around, but even she had to slow during her leaping fiery trail up the mountain. And it was just as we landed, and she rocked from the weight of her landing that the attack happened. Garbite. The scream was the only warning she got, as suddenly out of holes all around us Gibble and Garbite launched out, mouth first. Arc dash before I could even call out, she acted. The Gabite came out from the ground below us. Out of a hole in the rock that expanded instantly as it rushed out. The Gibble leapt out of holes as well, acting like the earth sharks that they were. Arcanine leapt. I was rocked back against her, as she basically leapt straight up to avoid the dog pile. It meant I couldn't see what was happening below us, although she seemed to know as she adjusted herself a bit in the air, and as we landed we were now turned around and facing the group as we stood on a large boulder to face. It was a Gibble nest. The whole place was dug down into the mountain, it was a creche. With tons of Gibble-sized holes throughout the whole thing. On the walls, on the ground, everywhere. Gabite turned to glare at us, and I narrowed my eyes. The entire creche was locked onto Arcanine and ready to take a bite. What a cool defense method. Any Pokemon that accidentally fell into the creche would be dogpiled by tons of bite attacks. It's only Arcanine's speed that kept her from getting torn apart like the Gibble were piranha. Hi. Nice to meet you. I called out. This did not in fact help the situation. Gar. The Garbite opened his mouth, and it was a male. I noticed the cut in his dorsal fin, and charged an attack. So did many of the Gibble. Most instantly flubbed the attack, which was actually super cute seeing them mimic the others and just exhale nothing, but then the actual attacks came. Dragon Breath. Dodge it. I called, and Arcanine did just that. Before the Gabite could even finish its attack, Arcanine was gone. Having leapt completely over the edge of the creche, leaving us completely out of sight. She turned back to me, I looked at her. And I giggled, while Arcanine gave a doggy grin as the attacks all just started exploding around inside the stone pit. Apparently, none of the shark dragons knew how to end a move early. We waited as the sound of dragon breath ended before Arcanine hurried and peeked over the edge, letting me lean over as well. Yep. That hadn't gone well. Most of the Gibble were on their backs, steam and smoke coming out of their mouths, and there were scorch marks everywhere. The Gabite looked a little roughed up as well. A lot of the Gibble near him were okay, and were all looking to him. I realized that they were little idiots. They had all looked to the Gabite for what to do once Arcanine disappeared. And then blasted him. Feeling a little responsible for it, I whistled. Then I pulled out a nice big orange berry. Here. Sorry about that. I called out to him and tossed the berry right at him. Which also happened to be a mistake. Every Gibble between me and the Gabite leapt to grab the berry. Even the ones that had moments before been nearly unconscious after getting blasted with a dragon-type attack. The Gabite did not in fact make a grab for it, instead just glaring as it bounced off his chest, and he instead reached out to smack 4 Gibble that were all leaping at him, teeth first. While he was distracted keeping himself from being bitten by his kids? Little siblings. Another Gibble ran over and snatched up the berry, swallowing it whole. This Gibble was then instantly dog-piled and a rumble broke out, that the filled Gibble seemed to barely even notice despite being bitten multiple times as the little horde of teeth all tried to get a berry. Okay, my usual method might not work here. Sorry. I called out again. Even as Gabite did not look like he was going to accept my apology. Wisps of dragon energy flowing out of his maw in a clear threat display. Do you want some berries? I really didn't mean to get you all so hurt. I called out, but it was Mimikyu still hiding in my hat that alerted me. The feeling of him tangled in my hair suddenly jerked and practically pulled my head to look behind me. Oh hello. Gar. The roar of a full-sized very angry female Garchomp echoed off the mountain tops. Huh. This was going to be fun. Chapter 45. Garchomp's threat display was aggressive, which was expected. Roaring and releasing dragon breath around it, showing off its power. It was strong for sure. This was the queen of this mountain, without a doubt. Which is why I stepped off Arcanine. Mimikyu, keep an eye out behind me, okay? I'm going to be a little distracted. If any of the Gibble or Gabite try to attack me, hit them with. Do you know play rough? I asked, and Mimikyu was silent for a moment before sliding down out of my hat, taking a second to untangle himself. He looked up at me as he fell into my arms and nodded. Perfect, play rough, will hit them pretty hard. Just don't hurt any of them too bad. If it gets too much, call out, and I'll release some backup, but I'll be trusting my back to you. I told him, and that was all he needed. Cuckoo cuckoo. He cried out and leapt, landing behind me. I nodded and focused on the Garchomp that was already preparing to strike. Arcanine. Go. That was all that needed to be said as she crashed headfirst into the Garchomp. An instant later the echoing noise of a gong blasted out across the mountains. I could hear how the noise startled the Gible and Gabite. But I didn't care. Because it was time to battle. A second later, Garchomp rose out from a cracked boulder she had been slammed into, and Arcanine held her strength. But I frowned, because on her head, despite Iron Head being in effect, there was definitely a bit of blood. The Garchomp had rough skin. Be careful. The Garchomp will scratch you back with every attack. I called, and Arcanine nodded, taking in the information. And then as the Garchomp snarled out a roar and charged again, its axe fins glowing with dragon-type energy. Arcanine charged back in with a flame wheel. The fire burst into life around her as she ran and made her seem so much bigger. Arcanine hit first, but Garchomp, despite being overwhelmed, roared and slammed its fins into Arcanine, and they both fell into the ground in a scuffle of fire teeth and scales. I winced as Arcanine used a fire fang to bite down on Garchomp and in turn ended up getting those sharp scales tearing into her mouth and tongue. She yelped, which gave the dragon enough room to do something I didn't expect. The ground rumbled, and as Arcanine was on her hind legs from flinching away, sand ripped up from the earth, and suddenly her footing was gone as she sank a few inches into the earth, as the sand also rolled up her limbs, grabbing her. That's Sand Tomb. I remembered. And Sked. That was a hold move. Garchomp had a few moments as she rose back to her feet and roared. The Gible and Garbite roared in time with her, but despite the damage Arcanine was taking fighting against the grabbing earth, roaring in her face was a quick way to really piss her off. Arc! She roared back and fire burned around her. I smiled, because someday there would be a time when the sand holding her back wouldn't just be blasted up by flame, giving her all the movement she needs. It would be turned to glass. But that day wasn't today. Despite our strength, we still had a long way to go yet. But Garchomp? She wasn't equal to Blaine's Magmar. Or even Koga's team. She was strong, true, but wild power didn't match trained strength. Arcanine prepared an attack, but I cut her off. Stop playing. And instead, play rough. I called, and that was it. Garchomp moved to run into Arcanine again, but it was too slow. Arcanine shifted, and instead of a brutal attack, the energy around her shifted into a fog as the noise of multiple blows reached out from within the hidden area. It was over in an instant. The fog cleared, and Garchomp was down. A moment later I jerked and looked behind me because the same noise echoed out, and I looked to see Mimikyu appear standing on top of the Gabite that had made a move on me while I was distracted. Many of the Gible were looking on as well. Their eyes sort of blank, but I had a feeling that depending on my actions I might just get swarmed. I smirked. Come on out. I threw a Pokeball even as Gabite slowly tried to return to its feet looking beaten, the Pokemon obviously intending on fighting, but then a cheerful call echoed out. Chansey! Chance! The descended goddess cheered and looked around nodding. Then she motioned as if she was rolling up her sleeves. And despite the dragon-type's hesitation, none of them could keep up with her as she simply bulldozed through them on her quest for healing. A Gible leapt at her, as she hovered over Gabite, and instead of getting a bite it was slapped straight into the sky. One Gible tried to blast her with dragon breath, only for her to pick up a boulder to block the attack without even really focusing on it, and then slam the rock onto the Gible to quiet it. I could see the poor dragon twitching weakly under the rock. Yep. That's Chansey all right. Despite winning, Arcanine was humbling herself before Chansey, whining as she scooted over to her tail between her legs as she showed her slightly bleeding tongue. Chansey glanced over from healing a Gible which was held in her fins and looked sort of shocked about its new position, but Chansey nodded, and blasted Arcanine with a healing pulse, then simply stuffed a soft-boiled egg into Arcanine's mouth which she gently chewed, already looking better. Then Chansey turned her eyes onto Garchomp. Without hesitation, she walked over and started her work. healing up the mighty dragon. A moment later, Garchomp jerked awake and rose instantly, locking eyes onto Chansey. They stared into each other's eyes, even as Chansey continued to heal the dragon. Gar, dash. That was as far as the dragon got into what had looked like a rather nasty bite before it was grabbed by its horn protrusion and just tossed directly into the side of a mountain with one move. The Gabite and Gibble all jumped at the sudden noise of their leader smashing through rock, and I looked over to see Garchomp herself seemed startled at her new position. Then Chansey as usual, just hurried over and started healing again. I could almost see the thought shoot through the Garchomp's head, it probably didn't know exactly what happened. So it just relied on instinct. She made to attack Chansey again. This time, the dragon came to upside down, having been embedded into a boulder. And a much less happy Chansey looming over her. Chance. She demanded, simply, a single word. And the Garchomp staring at the upside-down pink blob must have realized something was up. She nodded. And Chansey's frown turned into a smile. Chansey. She cheered and then finished her job of healing. KKKKKK. Mimikyu seemed to stutter as I looked down and found him hiding behind my leg. Yeah, Chansey has that impression on Pokemon. She's great though. You'll be good friends with her, I know I am. I assured my little buddy and he nodded but didn't stop sort of cowering. But he would get comfortable with her soon. He still needed a full checkup after all. I don't think Chansey would let that pass. So instead I focused on what I was here for. It wasn't beating up on dragons, despite that being pretty fun too. I walked over to Garchomp. Completely at ease, despite walking up to a Pokemon that towered over me. This was a pretty big Garchomp too. She wasn't alpha big, but she was big enough that she was probably close. Hi. I'm Vicky. I'm a Pokemon trainer. I travel all over and take part in powerful battles. But what I really do is find friends that want to grow to be the strongest together with me. I said, and the Garchomp turned her eyes on me, and just glared teeth bared. Oh, don't worry. I'm not looking to capture you. This is your home, your family. Instead, I want to find one of the Gibble, a Gibble that wants to come with me. To see the world. To battle Pokemon all over, the strongest Pokemon in the world. And then? Defeat them. I finished my speech with a clenched fist. Garchomp's teeth slowly disappeared as her lips lowered back over her jaw. Gar? That's right. I'm looking for a new friend. So how about it? I think my Pokemon proved they are strong, right? Let me find a Gibble that wants to come with me, and I'll leave you and your family alone. I mean, if you don't accept my offer, I'll leave. I won't force it if you refuse. Gar. She scoffed, looking deeply down on me. Gar. Garchomp Gar. She said with distaste in the way her voice rumbled. I frowned at her as well. Chance. Chansey interrupted then and pointed at my belt instead of answering my confused gaze. Right at a specific Pokeball. Well, far be it from me to not follow Chansey's advice. I pulled it off my belt and released it at my side. It's kind of funny. I don't really think about how big my Pokemon are most of the time. Or how far they have grown under my care. So when I released Dragonite, who stomped onto the earth as her weight landed on the rock, I blinked in realization. Dragonite was kinda big. She a big girl. A great big honker chonker. She dwarfed Garchomp completely. Wider and taller, and just from a glance between them healthier. Garchomp had dozens of old scars across her body, and a leanness that hinted at food not always being easy to get. Dragonite had none of these issues, and instantly, the Garchomp was on the back foot. I could read it in her body language. She went from downtrodden but petulant to seeing a true threat to her in a way Arcanine and Chansey weren't. Dragonite dragon. She greeted Garchomp and then looked around at the Gibble and lone Gabite. The dragons all watched her with a locked-on gaze. Not one of them let their eyes wander. It was interesting how different these dragons were from the Dragonite I had met on the island. There everything was relaxed. Here? Not so much. The Gibble were much more aggressive. It was neat. Finally though, whatever Dragonite was saying got through to Garchomp, and she huffed out a rumbling growl, then stomped off towards the gibble. Cook. Mimikyu whispered from my shoulder, which he had climbed back up onto in all the commotion. He was looking around in shock at all the powerful Pokemon that surrounded him. My friends are pretty amazing. Don't worry. You're on my team now too. We'll get you trained up too. I assured him, which earned me a shadow claw through my hair as he seemed to worry at it. I rubbed my head against him for a second before refocusing. Garchomp walked down into the gibble pit and then roared. A call that echoed out, and instantly the gibble reacted. Running all over each other to gather around. How cute! They all gathered in a semicircle in front of Garchomp. Gabite was the only one that stood at her side. But even from out of the holes in the walls, more gibble showed up. What I had seen so far wasn't even the entire group. Likely some had been sleeping, or just weren't strong enough to fight. I watched as they piled out, little shark dragon faces all focused on their leader. Then she huffed and turned to me, eyes locked onto my own. Ah. I guess I got to pick after all. I stepped forward fearlessly, walking down the sand-covered rock ramp that led down into their little creche. And as I walked, the attention of the gibble turned from their leader, onto me. If I was a normal person, I might be getting a little worried at walking down into a pit of sharks, but honestly, it just made me want to pick them up and play with them all. Look at their little teeth. They all had cute little over, or under bites. It actually was slightly different on each gibble. One little female I noticed had an overbite that made her look like some janky girl anime character. I threw her a smile, and then she opened her mouth showing her teeth. That was a threat display. How cute. Kinda like a croc or an alligator. I walked past the Garchomp, who had definitely leaned over to try and intimidate me, but how could I be scared when there were so many cuties? Besides, it was just an ego threat, and not an actual one. She loomed, and her mouth opened, but her axe fins were kept well back. One of Garchomp's eyes kept shooting over towards Dragonite, who was quite literally casting a shadow over the entire proceedings, standing on the edge of the pit with the sun behind her. The first gibble I walked up to took a bite at me unconsciously. It was just their pure instinct at work. I stepped back and avoided it, giving it a look. It had no intention of not trying again. Kinda cute, but not what I was looking for. Gib. Gib. Gibble. They chattered to each other as I walked closer among them, but none of them were standing out to me, even if my instinct was to grab all of them. Then I saw it. A scuffle. One of the gibble noticed another pushing forward, and when he looked back, he reacted, smashing into the other one to knock it back. The smaller gibble didn't just get pushed away, she was knocked away, rolling in the dirt. Then, despite having just taken an attack, she rose up and pushed against the back of the gibbles in front of her again, only to once more be snapped at, and pushed away once she was noticed. The runt. A tiny female. That's what I was seeing. She was tiny compared to the others, covered in old scars. Yet. She got up. I moved through the crowd without hesitation, pushing away gibble that snapped and bit. Stomping on one larger gibble's head, that made to bite at my legs, literally walking over him. These little guys weren't strong enough to be scary. Their bites would hurt, but they would have to actually bite me first. Then I pushed the gibble in the back that was snarling at her to the side, grabbing his fin and tail, and just swinging him away as he rolled around in the dirt like a wheel for a few seconds. Then I was there. The female rose up and noticed that the gibble that had just hit her wasn't there, instead I was. Hi. I whispered calmly, as I pulled out a potion from my bag. My name's Vicky. I introduced myself, and then I moved to spray the potion ready for what was going to happen. The snapping jaws came down, but not on the potion, but instead biting down on the oran berry I had prepped for the attack. The look of surprise on the gibble's little face was pretty cute. I reached out before she could react and sprayed the potion on a bite that she had just earned for herself. There you go. I whispered quietly, and she seemed confused for a moment, before her instincts came out and she instantly gobbled down the berry. Like a feral dog given food, she nearly choked on it, getting it down far enough it couldn't be stolen from her. Doesn't that face shoot? I cursed. The moment her mouth was cleared, she leapt for a bite. Realizing I didn't have a good defense as I had gotten too close, I shoved my hands forward, dropping the potion bottle and grabbing top and bottom jaws. It didn't quite work, and I winced as the line of sharp teeth hidden behind her gums cut my hands, but I kept her from biting down entirely. Muscles in my arms strained as I held back the Pokemon that had me in a dangerous position. I breathed in and out. The anger flowed out of me, even if the pain distracted me. I could hear a growl flow over the audience, and I recognized it. Dragonite. Okay, time to calm things. Instead of pushing her away, I instead pulled her closer. Until we were eye to eye. My blue eyes met her black ones. And I held her gaze. I couldn't allow fear to stop me. The Pokemon would react to that, so despite the pain, and the surprise at being bitten, I just held that little dragon's attention. Don't you want something more? I asked her, and that earned a widening of her eyes. As the feral instinct gave way to the intelligence behind it. If you do. If you want to be more. I can help you get that. I grunted out as I felt blood flown down my fingers. Gwib. Do you want to come with me? I asked directly, and that was when I felt it. The other gibbles moving in around me. Ah, that's right. I was kneeling on the ground with my back turned to an entire army of shark dragons. But the sound of whistling calmed me, and let me stay focused on the dragon in my hands. Slowly her jaw unclamped, making me wince at the feeling of teeth leaving my flesh. Owie. Dragonite was there behind me, looming, and a single gibble under her foot. The one that had just leapt at my back teeth first. Yeah, I was safe. Mimikyu also made his presence known as he growled out something that sounded particularly threatening from behind me. Ku. He nearly howled, and I could feel a coolness brush my back. Some kind of attack was being built up by him. But I kept my eyes locked on Gibble, and it finally stopped biting fully, letting me clutch my very ouchy hands to my sides to hide how bad it hurt. Gib? Gibble? Yeah, I'm sure. I looked over all the Gibble here, and you? You are the one that I know will become more powerful than them all. I said confidently. With a hissed breath I reached into my bag, ignoring the mess of blood, and held out a premier ball. Putting it between us. Even as its white shell ran red. Join me. I said confidently, and a moment later Gibble looked at the ball to me, and then nodded, but didn't do anything with the pokeball. Ah, it was confused. It didn't know what a pokeball was. It's a pokeball, you rest inside it, and a trainer can take you all over the world. It means you're part of my family. It tilted its head, which was actually its whole body, and I pressed the ball against Gibble. A moment later it disappeared inside, and the pokeball only rocked a few times almost like it was surprised, before it calmed and the pokeball locked. A moment later, Chansey was at my side. Chansey. She whispered gently, and let go of the pokeball that I had been staring at to see. Yeah, that was pretty bad. Chansey. She huffed at me, and I looked away from the blood, and instantly my resolve crumbled. Owie. I said, and then more and more it hit me, and my eyes clouded over. See Chansey. I cried, and she looked at me as if trying to decide whether me doing something this stupid meant I deserved comforting. Then she reached out and patted me on the head. Chansey Chance. She assured me, and a pink light flowed out from her palms, blunting the pain instantly. I was still trembling and crying a bit as she then scooped up the same potion bottle I had used on Gibble, and sprayed my hands down, with a surety that she had done that before. Then she reached out. Chansey. And poked my pokeballs. My. Milotic cried out in an angry trill as he appeared and instantly wrapped me up in his coils, turning towards the Gibble behind me, and in just a single hissed verbiage sent out a warning that would have caused my spine to tingle if it had been aimed at me. Milotic. He growled, and Mimikyu eeped behind me. Chance. He was interrupted, and Chansey's order cut through his anger. A moment later, some cool clean water was flowing over my palms, and I flinched. But Chansey gently soothed me, and was cleaning up my hands. Garchomp. Dragon. Dragonite Dragon Drag. Gar. Garchomp. Gaak. There was a whistling noise behind me, and then a massive crash. I think Garchomp said something silly. Then it was mostly over. I sniffled a bit as Chansey continued to take care of me, and Milotic trilled against my ear as he rubbed against me. "Owie." I wiped my eyes with my sleeve and looked at my hands. There were little bite marks of pale flesh now. The wound completely healed away with a bit of potion and Chansey's work, but they still hurt a bit. A dull ache, that I knew from previous healings would fade over the next hour or so. Pokemon medicine really was crazy. Chansey chance. Chon chon. I was assured, and Chansey smiled and patted my head. I guess I was okay. Let's get out of here. I decided and rose up, walking over and picking up Gibble's blood-covered pokeball. I stared at it for a moment. I would never be able to tell my parents I had done this. They would kill me. Hell, I should be calling myself a moron for it too. What kind of moron puts their hands anywhere near a Gibble's mouth? But that was just it, wasn't it? Pokemon training was as safe, or as dangerous as a trainer wanted it to be. If you wanted to be safe, there were plenty of Caterpie, or Pidgeys in Kanto, that would grow strong with some training. Lots of easy to get along with Pokemon that would love you without danger. But I wasn't a safe trainer. The same urge that had sent me to Dragonite Island. The same desire that sent me into a stream one late night to find a Magikarp. I loved Pokemon. I loved them. Would I accept the pain of injury to make a new friend? No, that wasn't the real question. Would I accept pain to help a friend? Of course. So of course, if I saw a Pokemon in need of help, I would reach out a helping hand. Regardless of the pain I might receive in return. Gibble deserved to be happy too. Drag? Milo? Miailo? I'm okay, I said confidently. As I wiped at my eyes a bit and turned to see my Pokemon looking worried for me. Mimikyu was literally reaching out to me, his shadow claw hidden in the Shadow Dragonite and Milotic cast, too afraid to get in between me and my team, but looking worried. I flashed him a happy smile and held out my arms. Come on, Mimikyu. Want a hug? I offered and was instantly slammed into, which had me twirling a bit as I giggled. I never introduced you to everyone, huh? We'll do that when we get out of here. I think Garchomp is about done with us. I mentioned, looking over and seeing her very much not happy as she was standing in front of another Garchomp-shaped hole in the rock. Return everyone. Yes, that means you Arcanine. I called out as my girl had been basically running circles around the pit the entire time. Dragonite? Can you fly us back to the cave? She nodded, gently picking me up and even being nice enough to princess carry me as we fled into the sky. I leaned into her, one arm cuddling Mimikyu to my chest, the other holding Gibble's bloody pokeball. Chapter 46. Ivy? You okay? I don't want to talk about it, she informed me bluntly as she poked at the fire with a stick. If she was just grumpy, I would have, but the cave was trashed. Her tent was knocked over, and it had holes in it now, and that didn't even touch on Ivy herself. Her hair was covered in leaves, like something had stuck them into her hair, matching the color. It was kinda pretty in a way, but she also had leaves sticking out of her clothes, and she looked a little haggard. I opened my mouth to press, but the cool feel of Gibble's pokeball in my hand reminded me. Yeah, I get that. I answered instead, wandering over and sitting across from her. I sat on the little log that I had been using as a seat and just stretched out my legs. Cuckoo? Oh? Sure, Mimikyu. I agreed, and he nodded. He was pointing outside the cave, asking to go. Not sure what he was doing though. Vicky? Huh? Oh, the blood? Nothing to worry about. I waved it off. I still had dried blood on my shirt and pants even if I had washed up at the river before coming in. You look like your day went as well as mine. It wasn't bad. Exactly. She offered, and I just waited, as she seemed to grumble about it before sighing. I caught a new Pokemon. It's not what I was expecting. Yeah? What is it? Not sure actually. I think it was a Sewaddle? It was. I thought it was a grass type, she said with a sigh, and I blinked. Oh. Sawaddle are so cute though. And they are grass types. Well, bug grass, but dash. Of course you know what it is. Ivy said with a laugh and then sighed. It was going pretty well, and the Pokemon was very friendly. Just a little too friendly, she admitted, and I just cocked my head because that made no sense. You can't have a Pokemon that's too friendly, Ivy. Like saying something is too cute. Don't give me that look. Here. Come on out. She said, grabbing a Pokeball on her belt, and then, oh my Arceus. Look at the little cutie. I cooed as Sawaddle appeared and looked around, looking a bit confused for a second. Then my voice got its attention. And it leapt at me. I pushed my head back, but it wasn't going for a kick or a headbutt. Instead it landed on my knee and instantly raced around my clothes. Tiny needle-like teeth going to work, and my jeans floated only a bit as suddenly little leaves were sewn into my clothes. I looked up at Ivy, whose entire outfit was sort of covered in leaves. I just threw a thumbs up at Ivy. Good choice. She rolled her eyes at me and sighed. I don't see the issue. Just wait until she starts pulling pieces of your sleeping bag apart to sew into other things. She muttered, pointing at her tent. Huh. Well, she is a wild Pokemon, Ivy. I said, looking in delight as my jeans got a spiraling set of leaves sewn into them. Hey Sawaddle? Can you look here for a second? I asked, getting her attention, which was a struggle. She gave me a glare at my interruption. See that? I said, pointing at Ivy's tent. That's Ivy's shelter. You can't sew it up, or do anything to it. She needs that. Sawaddle looked from me, to the tent, then to Ivy, and then to the tent. So. It cheered and leapt off me, to jump at the tent. I blinked as Ivy just groaned. I tried that already, Vicky. She grumbled, and I did shoot her an apologetic look. I guess Sawaddle really was just a sewing fiend. A black hat seamstress? Sewing whatever she set her eyes on? Heh, don't laugh. No. Sorry, I wasn't laughing at you, Ivy. Honest. I assured her. But looking at Sawaddle, that was definitely a problem. Sawaddle, return. Ivy called out, and the Pokemon jerked up from where it was cutting a fresh hole in the tent, as it disappeared into red light. That's gonna be a tough one to train. I'll just need to work on it. Preferably as far from my bedroom as I can get. Ivy said with a sigh, and I just giggled at her. Ivy's room already looked like a forest. I couldn't imagine how it would look covered in actual leaves. What about you? Oh. I actually. Well, it was good? Mostly? Mostly good? I confirmed to myself. I managed to convince the gummies. I captured tons of them, so they will come to Kanto with us. Vicky. You really shouldn't do that. The rangers are going to be mad. There was a Kitakami guy that I met. He was hunting them, Ivy. Not to eat or something. To exterminate them. I said, and Ivy actually gasped. The idea of exterminating a group of Pokemon was pretty crazy in Kanto. Even things like Grimer and Mook weren't treated like that. Not to say certain groups wouldn't be killed if needed, but it was still a big deal. Yeah. I saved them, and convinced them to let me take them home. It'll take a lot of effort to make sure they fit into Kanto, but I think it'll be okay. They are herbivores, and very friendly. If you say so. Ivy said with a shrug. We both knew it would be up to the rangers anyways. Well, congrats on getting the gummy you were looking for. Is that how you got hurt? The Kitakami hunter? Nope. Afterwards I searched through the cave the gummy had been using, and it went on and on and on. I popped out on the northern side of the mountain. But I knew there was another Pokemon that I wanted to capture, so I went further up the mountain to find them. I shrugged. They were pretty aggressive, and I got bit while trying to connect to Gibble. He bit you? And yeah. They are predators, and their instincts are strong. I nodded, as I grabbed the blood-covered Pokeball. Come out, Gibble. The splash of light, and then she appeared, blinked as her eyes adjusted to the light inside the cave. I could see the way her eyes dilated as her instincts kicked in. Which is why I jumped to my feet and caught her just as she leapt at Ivy. Grabbing her under her arms, I hefted her up and around, bleeding off the momentum of her leap. Although she reacted to my grab by going after me, I wiggled her around, keeping her mouth from snagging me. Ivy had leapt to her feet as well, nearly falling backwards as the Pokemon attacked her. Vicky! Sorry. She's pretty wild still, I said, and then I shifted my hands, grabbing her top fin and her tail and sending her into a funny little forward roll away from Ivy and I. Ivy looked utterly confused as Gibble came out of her roll and teetered a bit before shaking off the dizziness. Hey Gibble. No bite, I said, and my voice had her focus on me once more. This time, her eyes didn't quite dilate and she seemed to calm down. Gib? Yeah. You're pretty quick to bite things, huh? That's okay. We'll work on that. Make sure you feel safe. You hungry? I offered, and instantly Gibble jerked a bit at the words. Gibble. I smiled and slowly moved over to my log. Why don't you come sit with me? I'll make some yummy food for you? I offered, and then did just that before she could respond. Turned my back and settled onto the log. I looked over at her, noticing she had instinctively moved after me, and then stalled as my eyes met her. I held her gaze unwavering. Gibble, come sit, I demanded, and that seemed to jolt her. She slowly took a step, and then another, and then reached the log and climbed up onto it, almost curiously, and then copied me, sitting on the log facing the fire. I smiled and got to work. Watching out of the corner of my eye as Ivy gave me a glare and then settled back on her log, Gibble locking onto her and staring. That's Ivy. She's a Pokemon trainer too, and she is very strong. If you bite her, her Pokemon will get angry, I said, speaking slowly and calmly as I took out a pot to get some water going. Gib, she muttered, tearing her eyes off Ivy to focus on me, at my hands moving around. She looked almost entranced as she watched me work, slowly pulling things out and getting them ready. Gibble? I asked, and she focused on me hard. Let's find out what your favorite flavor is, okay? She didn't quite tilt her head, because Gibble were all mouth and necks, but she did look confused. So I started pulling out berries, and instantly got her absolute attention with food. I'm going to give you each of these, I said as I pulled out the berries. Then you are going to tell me which one you like the most, okay? Gib, she responded, mouth opening wide and literally salivating at the sight of so much food. So I placed the first berry out of her reach and she quickly scooped it up and it disappeared into her mouth, chewed up and swallowed. Then the next, and the next. Which one did you like the most? I asked, and Gibble just looked at me. Gib. I blinked. She didn't. Were any of the berries better than the others? I asked, and again just received a blank look. I pulled out more berry chunks and placed them on a plate and offered them to Gibble, but those were just instantly grabbed and stuffed into her mouth. She probably doesn't have a preference, Vicky. Some Pokemon are like that. My dad's Venusaur will eat anything, Ivy offered, and I nodded. There were a few natures that didn't give benefits and negatives to stats, and meant Pokemon didn't have a flavor preference. Does that make my Gibble quirky, or hardy? I don't think she fits as docile or serious. I shrugged, it didn't really matter. I would learn more about her personality as time went on, so instead I focused on the advantage this would give me. If she didn't care what it tasted like, I could pack her full of extra vitamins to help build her up. Right now, she was small and scrawny, the runt of the pack, but to do that, I needed expert advice. Come on out, Chansey, I called as I released her, and she looked around and waved a greeting. Her appearance instantly had Gibble jumping up into attack mode. Her leap for a bite was stalled completely as Chansey simply grabbed her midair. Chansey, she said, scolding, and that was all that needed to be done. Gibble froze. Chansey looked down at the Gibble in her fins, and Gibble stared up at her, and slowly that mouth closed more and more until it shut completely. Oh my Arceus! Gibble had a very cute overbite, a single tooth sticking out over her bottom jaw. It was so cute. Wait. Was this the first time I had seen Gibble with her mouth fully closed? I snorted at the fact my Gibble was just always ready for bites. Properly disciplined. Chansey settled her back on the log and Gibble was quiet as Chansey looked to me. Help me figure out her diet? I begged and Chansey giggled and nodded. Is Gibble going to keep doing that? The biting thing? Ivy asked a little warily. It's instinct for them, I think. I replied as I started gathering things out of the bag for Chansey. They eat anything that lands in their creche on the mountain. I think it's how the Gibble survive. Eat whatever they can right away or their siblings will eat it instead. Very cutthroat. It's why she is so scratched up. She was the runt. Wait. Those are scratches and scars. Ivy demanded, sounding outraged. Yeah? They are pretty rough with each other, and she was the smallest Gibble out of them all. Ivy looked fierce for a moment as she rose up and slowly approached Gibble, who locked eyes on her. Ivy approached slowly and then knelt down. My name is Ivy, don't worry. We're going to be friends. I hope we can get along. She offered Gibble and I smiled in delight at the confused look on Gibble's face. Cuck. The voice from the entrance of the cave called out quietly as Mimikyu returned and to my delight, I now understood what he had gone out to do. He came back and offered what he had found to Ivy. The flower looked a little wilted, a wild flower. Held out by a hand of shadow. Cuckoo? What? Mimikyu got a flower for Ivy? Ivy blinked in shock, looking down at Mimikyu and the flower, and she slowly took it. Thank you. Cuckoo. He cheered and then scurried over to me, sliding around my leg for a second before climbing up my back and landing on my shoulder. That was very nice of you, Mimikyu. Good job. Ifo whispered, and Ivy I noticed had a smile on her face. Heh. Mimikyu was such a sweetheart. Did Milotic have competition for most Chad Pokemon? Gibble devoured her meal and to my amusement immediately rolled onto her back and just fell asleep right there on the ground. I let her sleep and even settled in for the night as well. Ivy grumbled for about an hour about her tent being full of holes, but eventually she fell asleep and I did as well. Drifting off into a nice restful sleep. Dreams of fluffy Pokemon filled my brain until something suddenly changed. I awoke suddenly as I felt it. Something stepped on me. I opened my eyes and came face to face with Gibble. She stared into my eyes. I stared into hers. Mimikyu kept snoring under my hat, curled up by my pillow, and I realized my Pokeballs were beside me outside of my sleeping bag, and out of reach. I kept calm, despite my heart hammering in my chest. Gibble wasn't looking at me like I was friend-shaped. She was looking at me like I was food-shaped. It was in the way her eyes were locked onto me. The way she moved. I worked a hand free of my bag slowly, something she noted and was eyeing, and then calmly, I reached out a hand. She tensed. A hunger in her eyes. But I didn't angle for her head. I aimed for her red belly. She stilled as my hand touched her scales, and then I stroked, even scratching a bit. Her eyelids lowered a bit, and even in the dull dark of the almost burned-out fire, I could see her eyes dilate back to a normal size as she seemed to relax. She muttered, her head slowly arching up to the ceiling as I stroked her belly gently. I guess it had worked. I remember old nature videos about how sharks actually liked belly rubs, so half asleep as I was I tried it. That was dangerous for both of us. I whispered. If Gibble had attacked me, I likely would have been okay after with Chansey here, even if I likely would have been in a lot of pain, but if I had cried out? No chance my Pokemon wouldn't have noticed. We'll need to work on our relationship more. I muttered as I stroked her into a catatonia. You must be hungry again, huh? That's good. A really good sign. Let's fill up your belly. I continued to whisper soothingly, more for myself than Gibble. That had really shocked me. Was that a dragon's nature, Gibble's trauma of being mistreated as a runt, or just a quirk of hers? I wasn't sure, but it had certainly scared the crap out of me. I was absolutely sure, if I had reacted too fast, or done something to show myself as prey, she would have attacked me. Gibble, unlike the rest of my team, was going to be an interesting problem to solve. I had captured her because I liked dragon types. Because Garchomp were cute and strong. I had done it without really considering what that meant. Dragon types are difficult to train, huh? I whispered to myself. Although dragon types were rare in Kanto, there were still trainers from other regions with them. And that was a line of thought that ran throughout. I guess I had been lucky with Dragonite and Dratini. Both of them had been happy campers. Gibble I now knew would take a bit more of my effort to bridge the connection. Slowly I rose up, keeping Gibble content with belly rubs, which was definitely cute all on its own. As I rubbed my eyes with one hand and decided to get up for the day. Too much adrenaline to go back to sleep now. I picked up Gibble, which only slightly brought her back to awareness, but my continued scritching soothed her and I settled in front of the fire and started stoking it up. I'd get a big meal in her and hopefully showing her she didn't have to go hungry would help forge our relationship. Vicky? You're up early. Ivy muttered sleepily as she tucked her head out of her tent. It had been about 20 minutes and the smell of food cooking had probably woken her up. Had a bit of an interesting wake-up call. Hungry? I could eat. She agreed after a moment of blearily staring at me. She disappeared back inside and came out a bit later in her pajamas. The movement caught Gibble's eyes and she stilled, but she didn't move to attack. She was way too stuffed for that. So happily, she just returned to her previous position, eyes half closed as she just luxuriated in her full belly. Mimikyu was happily eating his own spicy meal. The fact I didn't have to cook massive pots full of food right now made the whole process pretty quick. I still needed to feed Dragonite and Arcanine and Chansey though. Pokeball stasis was great, but food was food. But that could happen later. I parceled out a hefty serving of breakfast for Ivy as she settled in, and then rose up. I'm going to wash up a bit. She blinked at me for a few seconds before nodding slowly. Okay. Ivy was all sleepy. I moved over to Gibble and slowly crouched down so she could see what I was doing. Gibble. We are going to wash up a bit. Come with me to the river? I asked her and she just blinked at me. How about you give me your claw? I offered to hold her hand, and she didn't seem to understand that one either, but she reached out to me, probably thinking I was offering more food. I gently grabbed her claw and she jerked back so I let her go, but then when I didn't do anything else just continue to offer my hand she reached back. I grabbed her hand and helped her up onto her feet and then I rose up and started walking, not tugging, but showing her I was going to move, and in a few moments she followed. Waddling after me. Cuckoo. Mimikyu called out and a moment later I had a shoulder Pokemon as well. Heh, glad you decided to come. I greeted him, which earned me a happy shiver, and I guided Gibble out of the cave, which she seemed to go along with purely out of bemusement. I took her to the river, and although she didn't want to go into the water, I showed her how to wash her hands up. Which she did with a bit of hesitation. Taking a drink of the water as well, but otherwise quickly hurrying away from the edge. Cleaned up, I got up and offered my hand again. She blinked up at me. Her mouth closed and snaggletooth on full display before she reached out and took my hand. I smiled and led her back to the cave. I'm going to do some training today. Ivy informed me as I got back. I still want to look for more Pokemon, but I need to spend some time on my team and work with my new Pokemon to see who wants to battle. She explained, stretching out. I still have a few more Pokemon I want to look for, but some training could be nice. Want to have Chansey help? Oh. That would be a big help actually. Is that okay? Sure, I wouldn't mind some training too. Want to train together? Ivy didn't immediately respond as she frowned a bit. Then whatever was on her mind was decided and she nodded. I do. I don't want to show you everything in case I see you in the league, but facing each other will give our new Pokemon some experience. Exactly. I nodded along as I rose up. This was actually going to be interesting, and I could tell Ivy thought the same. Both of us would be using new Pokemon. Pokemon we hadn't trained yet. We had never had that chance before. Ivy. You know what they say, right? I suddenly asked, eyes locked onto her own. What? When two trainers' eyes meet, they have to battle. I declared and pointed at her. Ivy. I challenge you. There was a quiet pause in the cave and then Ivy just scoffed. Vicky, you are so lame. Chapter 47. I was totally not pouting still when Ivy turned around across the field from me. I wasn't lame. I was so cool. I had a cool nickname and everything. I'm sorry I called you lame. Now can we focus on the training? Ivy asked, and I definitely didn't pout at her even harder. She sighed and rolled her eyes, which of course meant everything she was about to say was a lie. You are very cool and impressive. Totally amazing. I accept your challenge. Fine. I guess I'll let you train with such a lame person. I agreed, not being passive-aggressive at all. Definitely. Go. Fomantis. Ivy started and the Fomantis looked around sleepily for a moment before seeing Ivy, and instead of readying for battle, it wandered over to her and climbed up onto her foot. My desire to call Ivy lame was there, but honestly I couldn't say it, because Fomantis was obviously really in love with Ivy, and that was cute. Maybe a different one. Just release all of them and find one willing to battle. I called out, and she nodded, suddenly releasing all of her Fomantis, which all wandered over and seemed happy enough to climb up onto Ivy's feet. I burst into laughter because it was so cute. It's not funny. Ivy whined, but she didn't really do anything to stop it, instead crouching down and petting the Fomantis, getting their attention. Do any of you want to battle for me? The Fomantis all seemed to sort of preen at Ivy's attention, but didn't show much interest. Ivy's shoulders slumped. Then one of them seemed to notice. I think it was the first Fomantis Ivy captured. Because each of them had been pruned and taken care of by Ivy, but this one had the most attention given to it. The most elaborate change to her flower head. F.O. Fomantis. Foo. It cheered and jumped off her shoe. Oh. Fomantis. You want to battle with me? F.O. It agreed, and Ivy looked a little teary-eyed as she nodded firmly. Can the rest of you move back a bit? She told her little bundle of flowers, who did so, moving behind her, and then just seeming to find a sunny spot and falling asleep. I nodded, then considered what to do. Gummy, we're out. They hadn't agreed to battle or train with me yet. Gibble. Probably wasn't a great idea to start out with. That only left. Okay, Mimikyu. Time to get some practice in. I called and pointed, and from my shoulder, Mimikyu leapt off to land in front of me. Cuckoo. He cheered, and Ivy nodded. Are you ready then? She asked, and I was about to nod before stopping. I don't actually know all of Mimikyu's moves. I called out, and Ivy twitched as well. So neither of us actually figured that out. Quick break. I called, and she nodded, so I hurried over to Mimikyu and knelt down. Okay, let's go over all your moves, okay? Cuckoo. He nodded, and I smiled as I pointed off to the side. Shadow Claw. And then a claw of shadow slipped out and ripped into the earth. Cool. Okay, you probably know Wood Hammer, right? Kukuk. He did, so I had him show me that. He leapt and spun, slamming his tail into the earth. It did a little indent into the grass where it hit. Very strong. Super strong. But then Mimikyu cried out a bit as he staggered back before righting himself. Wait. Wood Hammer is a recoil move. I remembered, shocked at forgetting that. Chansey. I called out, quickly throwing out her pokeball, and she appeared beside me, looking around and not seeing anything wrong. Chansey? Mimikyu used a move that does recoil damage. Can you check him over, please? I asked desperately, and Chansey nodded, patted me on the head, and quickly using a heal pulse on Mimikyu. Cuckoo. I calmed down, because Mimikyu was confused, and I didn't want him to think he did something wrong. It was really cool. Look how strong it was. I assured him as I picked him up. I just have a rule not to use recoil moves on my team. I don't like you guys hurting yourself just to do a bit more damage. I explained and pet him on the head so he can be sure. So for now, no Wood Hammer. Okay? We'll train a way to use it later, as it's a good grass-type attack. Maybe we can reduce the damage to remove the recoil or something. Wood Club? Something like that. I said, and Mimikyu sort of tilted his head. Yeah, the idea of not sacrificing himself probably didn't make much sense. Pokemon were usually pretty quick to accept damage to attack. They loved battling after all. Don't worry. We'll work on it. Let's see, what other attacks do you have? I asked, and Mimikyu perked up as he showed off. Scratch, Astonish. These were good moves. Then Mimikyu showed off Shadow Sneak, and I was super happy to see that. Shadow Sneak basically extended a shadow from Mimikyu's shadow that stretched out and attacked a Pokemon. The reason it was so good, despite being low damage? It was a priority move. Just like Quick Attack or Extreme Speed. It meant that with some training, Mimikyu would be able to outspeed other Pokemon, just like the rest of my team. I nodded. That was a good step. Next move? I asked, and he sort of wiggled as he wasn't sure what to do. Then he looked over to Chansey and called out, "Cuckoo? Chance? Chansey." She agreed to his question, and then she released a heal pulse. I blinked, wondering what was going on, and then Mimikyu nodded at Chansey and released a heal pulse. I blinked, he looked up at me, definitely hoping for a positive reaction. Which I gave him. Copycat. You have Copycat. That's amazing. I cheered as I lifted him up and spun him around, earning a wiggly motion as he made sure his disguise was covering his bottom. Mimikyu. Copycat is a really good move. It's a great way to turn some enemies' moves against them. That's cool. I cheered, and Mimikyu looked really happy as his shadow arms flowed around him as if he wasn't sure what to do. So I hugged him to my chest. Hee hee. You are going to be so strong. Cuckoo. Okay, ready? I called, and Ivy nodded, her Fomantis looking towards Mimikyu. Begin. I called out, and Ivy reacted first. Leafage. Astonish. Mimikyu disappeared even as the leafage rose up from around Fomantis. Then he reappeared right in her face with a cry. Cuckoo. And it blasted into Fomantis with ghost energy. But then leafage blasted into Mimikyu's face. Fomantis kind of flinched, but her reaction was to scream and hit Mimikyu with everything. Kinda cute. FO. Leafage again. Make it so Mimikyu can't get close. The little grass type listened despite freaking out from Mimikyu's Astonish as she used leafage again and again to surround herself in leaves like a shield. Mimikyu. Don't get close. We won't play their game. Copycat. Blast their own leafage with your own. I called, and Ivy jerked to look at me with a glare. A moment later, a war of leaves broke out as the two attacks slammed into each other over and over. Dang it, Vicky. Ivy yelled at me, and I just laughed. Ivy's Fomantis also had two other moves. Growth and Ingrain. Both of which Copycat could now copy if she used them. And Fomantis wasn't very strong. So it only had leafage and its weak solar beam, which only really worked if they had a lot of time to gather up light. Wild Pokemon could be very strong, but they often weren't. Even Mimikyu was super weak compared to my normal team. But only for now. The first step was to practice. Give them some experience. Okay. Mimikyu. We are switching moves. Shadow Sneak. Ingrain. Ivy called out in turn. Our eyes had met, and I had conveyed that I wasn't going to let the battle end right there. This wasn't about winning after all, but about getting our Pokemon experience. A moment later, a shadow behind Fomantis rose up and struck her, causing her to cry out, but not move, because she had dug in her roots and was locked tight. I looked on. Fomantis now had a shield of leafage, and was healing every turn. Even if the shield had been damaged. This was a good setup for Ivy. Prepare it. She called out, and I blinked because I wasn't sure what it was. Sneaky Ivy. Mimikyu. They are being sneaky. So be sneaky right back. Copycat. Only it failed. I blinked. As Mimikyu looked to me and shrugged. Wait. Fomantis has no idea what you mean. That was just you wasting time so Fomantis could heal up. Hee hee. Ivy offered, and I scoffed at the audacity of this bitch. Shadow Claw. Leafage. The two Pokemon went at it, but Shadow Claw was much stronger than Astonish, and Mimikyu sliced through the leaves until it reached Fomantis and slammed into her. She slumped and Ivy and I both waited to see, but she just released a dizzy noise as she rocked around. I think that's it, I called and Ivy nodded. Chansey. Chance. She chirped as she walked over and healed up both Pokemon as I walked over to Ivy. That was sneaky. You're the sneaky one. Mimikyu is pretty strong. I can't wait until your Fomantis evolves though. Lurantis has some amazing moves. Lurantis? What's it like? Ivy asked, and I shrugged. Big. Pretty. It kinda looks like a bug type, but it's pure grass. So that's gonna trick some people. It's got a special move too. Solar Blade. Solar Blade? Ivy asked, and I nodded. Think Solar Beam, same mechanic of needing to charge it up, but instead it's a more physical attack, a blade. I said, making a whooshing noise as if the end of my hand had a sword. It's really cool. Solar Blade is super strong, and easily top 10 coolest looking moves. It's a lightsaber. Ivy just sort of nodded at my explanation. That does sound amazing. I've never heard of it before. It's Lurantis' iconic move. A few other Pokemon can learn it, but not many. Not even many other grass types. I think Lilligant can learn it. I tapped a fist into my palm as I remembered another Pokemon that could get it. What's a Lilligant? Just another grass type. They used to be in Hisui. I don't think they are in Sinnoh anymore though. I thought they were here in Kitakami though. I muttered, trying to remember. It was kind of weird that one of the big Hisui Pokemon didn't exist in modern Sinnoh. Lilligant either version wasn't in Sinnoh anymore, but I had thought that Lilligant did exist in Kitakami. Even if Petalil was in Unova Pokemon. Why were they in ancient Hisui then? There was no way Unova had any connection to Hisui. Ugh. I ran my fingers through my hair. Vicky? Pokemon migration factors over the centuries is really weird, Ivy. But good news. There might be Petalil or Lilligant here in Kitakami. We just need to check around some more. Maybe on the other side of the mountain? If the Fomantis all live here, then maybe the Petalil live on the other side so they don't fight? Let's check. Ivy demanded, looking fired up at the idea of another grass type. Grass obsessed. I teased, and she gave me a look telling me she was going to stuff grass in my mouth if I kept it up. Right. Come on, Dragonite. We need a ride to the other side of the mountain. Drag. She agreed, stretching out. Ivy returned everyone and Mimikyu slipped back into my hat. Training day cancelled for more Pokemon hunting. We ended up flying over the town, which I don't think even noticed our passage, but nothing was really happening, so I just appreciated it for its rustic charm, before we flew over the apple orchards and then into the wilderness beyond the zone Mosway town had made for itself. There we landed to get a look from the ground. Returning Dragonite, Ivy and I walked along the plains and light groves of trees to see what we could find. Ivy spotted something first, before sighing. A pair of Sawaddle making themselves clothes in a tree. You don't want to say hello? I asked, and she puffed up a bit and shook it off. I think one is enough. She muttered, reaching at the leaves that were sewn into her coveralls. I just giggled at her and waved at them as we passed, one of them cutely waving back. I loved Pokemon. We moved on, seeing a few herds and packs of different Pokemon on the plains, but because of the clearer view we saw them quickly run off once they noticed us. It was kind of a relief, because I didn't want to beat up a bunch of pups again. I guess out here, there was more human interaction even if it wasn't part of Mosway anymore. Ivy and I ran around, exploring. Both of us had a good time laying on our stomachs as we watched a pack of Furret running around a tree not far from us playing a game. Both of us struggled to keep from giggling at the adorable Pokemon, but neither of us made a move to try and capture one. Too bad it isn't a grass type. I told Ivy as we finally started rising back up, and she missed the elbow that she sent at me, making me giggle and run away, leading into a game of tag, which Ivy failed completely. Ivy might have longer legs, but her endurance wasn't nearly as good. Wahaha. Ivy, you need more exercise. That's not fair, she gasped as she grabbed her knees. I just giggled at her, until she caught her breath enough to keep going. We both were just wandering around when we heard it. The noise of a Pokemon battle. I was off before Ivy could register what it was. The crashing noise of moves blasting terrain urged me on, and I ran to find it. I could see the dust coming from ahead of me, a copse of trees hiding whatever was going on inside. Vicky, wait. Ivy was falling behind, so I threw out a pokeball. Arc. Arcanine called out and then looked on in confusion as I just ran right past her. Pick up Ivy. I yelled as I kept going. Legs pumping. The thought of slowing down to ride Arcanine didn't even register. Then I hit the trees and I could see what was up. A Staraptor was fighting a group of Seedot, with a Shiftry at its head. Unfortunately, I think the Staraptor had the advantage here. The group were working together using whatever moves they could, but barely any of them hit, and Staraptor was overwhelming them. Vicky. I turned to see Ivy riding Arcanine arrive beside me, and I pointed. She took it in, and within a second her decision was made. Arcanine. Flamethrower on the bird. She called out and I looked over. My eyes met with Arcanine. And then Flamethrower happened, because in that one look I understood. On one hand was Arcanine's loyalty to me. On the other was the chance for a battle. And one side instantly won. You traitor. I called out as Arcanine burst forth, Ivy still riding, and blew a blast of flames at the Staraptor. I could just sigh and facepalm as Ivy led Arcanine into a short battle before the Staraptor realized how outmatched it was and fled full speed into the sky. Yeah. Take that. Don't pick on grass types. Ivy yelled out at the sky, and I just rolled my eyes. So she says, while stealing my fire type. Then she leapt off, and rushed to the Seedot, and scratched up, but still defensive Shiftry. I didn't get involved though. This was Ivy's specialty, and more importantly, if she thought she could calm them and help, then she could do it. If she failed, she failed. But she should still have the chance to try. So I walked over to the preening Arcanine. Her fur was all fluffed up as she sat looking proud of herself, not looking at anyone, but just letting her fluff shift in the light breeze. Which is why I instantly grabbed the deadly weapon. Squirt. Yule. She cried as I squirted her right on the nose. She leapt back, falling completely onto her back and trying to fend me off as I squirted her again. She acted like I was murdering her when I did this, which made the next part even funnier. Once she was properly chastised, I adjusted the nozzle and then squired off to the side of her head. 3 squirts, and she had forgotten all about pretending I was murdering her, and she was attacking the stream. Chomping down on each squirt. Vicky? Nah, I'm good. Just let me know if you need anything. I called out, barely looking away from Arcanine attacking the evil streams of water that were shooting past her head. Once the bottle was empty, I put it back into my bag, earning a whine from Arcanine as she wanted to play more. Nope. I denied her, and that probably did more to punish her than the initial water bottle sneak attack. She squirmed around playfully, but I just looked down at her, arms crossed, and she huffed as she laid back still for a minute as she realized the worst thing ever happened. Playtime ended. I rolled my eyes at her reaction and instead reached out to poke her back paw, playing with the fluff between her toes, causing her to kick as I tickled her. Traitor. I taunted her, and she whined at my teasing. Then I looked over at Ivy, who had somehow convinced the Shiftry to trust her, as she used potions to heal up the Pokemon. The Seedot were jumping around her, and 2 Nuzleaf were keeping an eye on me and Arcanine as Shiftry watched Ivy closely. I just waved at the Nuzleaf and returned to poking at Arcanine. This situation was already fully under control, and I could already see how it was going. Ivy was going to walk away with another grass type. I almost giggled, but I held it in. Seed. Seedot, seed. The little Seedot demanded as Ivy stood up, having healed everyone up. The Shiftry jolted, but eventually it huffed in irritation and nodded. The Seedot then went to Ivy, and Ivy offered it a pokeball. The whole situation was really sweet. Alright, girl. Time for us to go. I told Arcanine, who finally rolled back onto her paws and shook the leaves and dirt off her coat. Arc. she called out, happily dancing around me a little as Ivy walked away from the shiftry, waving goodbye at them. We both left the little copse of trees and headed back into the plains. Only once we were far away did I speak. Grass type obsessed, I told her, and started running as she flailed at me. I cackled as she chased me again. Chapter 48. In the end, we never found any petalil. As the sun started drooping down, we flew back to our cave and settled in for another night in Kitakami. I crashed into my sleeping bag, stretching out on the soft fluff. Mimikyu, snoring already, with my hat covering him on top of a section of my sleeping bag. Ivy had her new Pokemon out around her. Fomantis, I learned, were nocturnal, being much more active, and not just snoozing the day away. But Ivy had a lot of new Pokemon. Her little team of Fomantis. Her Sewaddle, which she had managed to distract him with an older shirt that he was sewing into a cocoon of leaves at this point. Seedot seemed pretty fascinated by everything. Exploring around the cave and all the equipment we had, I looked at my Pokeballs. Mimikyu was already out, and I still didn't want to bother the Gummy until we were back in Kanto. Gibble. I should do some more connection stuff with Gibble, but I certainly wasn't going to sleep with her out unless I had more than just her out. But I couldn't let that night scare make me not want to connect with her. Come out, Gibble. I called loud enough Ivy could hear, and she nodded, instantly scooping up the Fomantis around her so they were on her lap and off the ground. Gibble appeared, and I could see her instantly take in the situation around her. Her jaw worked as she looked for whatever her instincts were demanding of her. I gave her a couple seconds. Long enough that her sudden release wouldn't cause a startled bite before speaking. Hi, Gibble. You want some food? I offered, and that got a reaction. She turned to me, and her eyes were thankfully her normal blank look. Gib? Yeah, why don't you come sit here, and I'll get you some food? I offered, patting a comfy spot on my sleeping bag beside me, and she stared blankly at my offer for a few seconds before it seemed to process through her brain. She took a step, and then another, until she was beside me. Her eyes watched me move, as I reached into my bag and pulled out some food stuff. I quickly set up a pot and got some protein kibble along with some berries for flavor and texture going. Dragonite's food would be good enough for Gibble for now, but I should probably get some specific kibble differences for the species. Luckily, Gibble didn't seem to care about flavors. I glanced over as I was chopping berries and almost went still, as I realized she had shifted, mouth open in a very obvious instinctual reaction to food. But she was practically touching my elbow, and I had a feeling she would clamp down on me, just as happily as on whatever I offered her. I hummed as I finished the chopping, tossing the mix of cut berries into the pan. Then very slowly, I pulled out a berry chunk with my cooking spoon and considered how to best do this. Gibble, do you want a taste? I offered, and I could see how my words barely registered in her eyes. Laser focused on the good before her. I sighed a bit. I would need to do something here. I plopped the spoon into the pot, and then adjusted myself so I was facing Gibble a bit more. Then I reached out and gently touched her. She twitched and instantly went on the attack. Mouth snapping as she tried to bite whatever was coming for her, but I was quick, and I expected it. I grabbed her. Right on her little shoulders so she couldn't bite me, and yet she still tried. I could hear Ivy gasping a bit from across the fire, and her Pokemon all started moving, but I only caught it out of the corner of my eye, because I was more focused on my Gibble. Hey! Look at me, Gibble. Come on. Look at me. I whispered quietly, just loud enough she could hear, but enough she might not fully understand without actually listening, and slowly she stopped her thrashing attempts to bite me and blinked. Her eyes dilated, returning to a more normal size. It was kind of interesting how her eyes did that. Hey, back with me? I asked, and she just sort of hung in my grip for a minute before she spoke, her voice almost clueless. Gibble? I snorted at the complete lack of comprehension in her tone. Yeah, you're back with me. Let's get you fed, okay? You don't have to struggle for food anymore. Whenever you get hungry, you can tell me, and I'll give you food. Gib? She asked, sort of pointing into her mouth, drool practically flowing out of her maw. I nodded, as I set her down, and grabbed the pot of stir-fried Gibble food. Throwing it onto a plastic plate, I very carefully offered it to Gibble between us. Eat slow, I warned, but that wasn't heeded and she instantly started trying to shove the entire plate into her maw. I struggled against her just a bit, but tipped the plate in, and then had to work a bit to get it out of her mouth as she choked down the entire meal. Gibble, the plate isn't food. It's like eating rocks. It won't be good. Don't bite it. I instructed her, and she wasn't fully instinctual, because she sort of listened, letting go of her bite, and I pulled the plate free, and sort of made a choking swallowing noise and then opened her mouth. Gib. Feel nice and full now? I asked, and she looked at me blankly. Of course, did she even know what being full meant? Let's clean up the plate. Cleaning up is part of eating, okay? I explained and she just looked on blankly, but when I offered her my hand, she looked from it to me, and back to it still confused. Reaching out I slowly touched her hand and she didn't react negatively. I slowly stood up holding on to her little claw hand and started walking, letting her see what I was doing. And Gibble rose up onto her tiny legs and followed me out of the cave. She helped me clean the dish, well mostly just watched, but she did try. And then I brought her back inside, and returned her so she could sleep. Vicky? Yeah, Ivy? I asked, looking at my friend who looked a little worried. That Pokemon. She's dangerous. All Pokemon are dangerous, Ivy. All of them. Never forget that. But yes, some are more dangerous than others. Gibble is still very feral, and maybe for a long time. She'll take a lot of work until I can fully trust her, but she needed help. I answered simply with a shrug. Are you sure? She seemed uncontrollable? Wild? Yeah. Her line of Pokemon have a reputation for being aggressive to start with, but honestly, Ivy, there isn't another Gibble in the world I would pick over her if I had a choice. I said as I flopped onto my sleeping bag. She's my friend now. Ivy just sighed and shook her head. Just be careful. Everyone always warned us about capturing Pokemon that don't take orders well. Well, I guess that explains why we are friends then, because we both have that problem. What? No, I don't. All of my Pokemon are sweethearts. She denied, looking a little offended and confused. Ivy. Your Sewaddle is turning your pillowcase into a leaf fort. What? No. Sewaddle. I said leave my bedding alone. No. She screamed as she pulled out what used to be her pillow, but was now sewn into a leaf pile. Just a mess of leaves covering it. The next morning Ivy demanded some training battles and marched out of the cave early. She's just grumpy because she didn't have a pillow last night. I told Mimikyu, who looked on, confused at Ivy's retreating back as she stomped out of the cave. Cuckoo. It's okay. If we have to, we can always fly out of here and hit a Pokemart or something. I shrugged. It wasn't a big deal, Ivy was just grumpy. Mimikyu was such a sweetheart for worrying though. I followed Ivy out of the cave and towards our little battle space, and her grumpiness had increased her seriousness. Go. She called out instantly as I arrived and Fomantis appeared looking eager and ready, its little eyes narrowed aggressively. Okay. Mimikyu. Cuckoo. He cheered as he leapt off my shoulder, and it was on. Our Pokemon battled, both enjoying the fight, as they both tried to get stronger. Cut it up with Shadow Claw. I called out, as Mimikyu defended against a leafage. Drain Mimikyu, Fomantis. You can do it. Ivy called out in return, switching to a different attack. We were both smiling widely, Ivy's irritation disappearing as our Pokemon battled it out, also having a blast. Of course, then something smacked into the back of my head. Ow. I whined, spinning around and glaring at the interloper. Rio. Riolu laughed at me, hands on her knees. You little shit. I snapped, reaching down to grab the apple she had bonked me with and chucking it back, but she just casually caught it with one hand and sent me an evil jackal grin. Vicky. We are battling. Ivy called out, but before I could complain at her for calling me out, she turned to Riolu. That wasn't very nice, Riolu, you shouldn't interrupt a battle. If you want to play with Vicky, you can do it after. What? I'm not playing with that brat. Rio. Riolu, Lu Rio. We both exclaimed in disgust, before realizing we were both saying the same thing. You both are silly. Ivy decided and returned to her with a glare, and she just rolled her eyes at our shared glare. Are we going to finish this? Ivy asked, waving at Mimikyu and Fomantis, that were both looking at us with confusion. Rio. She called out, and to my surprise she ran out onto the field and faced me with a challenge on her face. Oh, it's like that, is it? I grumbled before pointing firmly. Mimikyu. We are changing targets. Sorry, Fomantis. Use Shadow Claw on that pup. Kukukuku. He shouted as he leapt to do just that. Rio. She shouted as she took a firm stance and then shot forward, her paw glowing as it clashed into Mimikyu's claw with a screech of metal. They both were blasted back, and then it was on. Hee hee. Mimikyu. Teach the pup a lesson. Use Astonish. Riolu had fallen back into a wide stance looking for the attack, but then suddenly the ghost attack surprised Riolu by appearing suddenly in the corner of her eye, slamming into her. But she didn't flinch. In her paw she retaliated, as a vacuum wave roared out, and surprised Mimikyu. Unfortunately, his disguise was already damaged, so he took the blow to his little face. Re. She laughed as Mimikyu fell back with swirly eyes. I guess he had been too tired to go all out against Riolu after Fomantis had worn him down. It's okay, Mimikyu. You did great, little buddy. I called out, as I grabbed another pokeball, throwing it out. Chansey. She cried out, looking around at the fierce-looking Riolu that looked like she was still going to fight, and Mimikyu looking a little tuckered out. Chance. She cheered and then hit Mimikyu with a heel pulse. Riolu, though, didn't realize the battle was over. The little battle maniac. She charged suddenly, going for a steel claw on Chansey. Leaping into the air, she came down crying out, when it felt like everything stopped. Chansey had reached up and simply slapped a fin into the outstretched blow, and then with a casual twist tugged Riolu right out of the air and into a nasty overhead slam. Riolu cried out in shock and a bit of pain at the hit, and then laid there on the ground staring into the sky, huffing lightly as the wind had probably been knocked out of her. No one struck at the goddess without divine punishment. Of course I didn't have a chance to walk over and tease the shit out of Riolu, because suddenly a firm call echoed out. Lucario. I looked over and Lucario was glaring, not looking very happy. Chansey. Luca. Chance? Rio. I watched the back and forth for a moment, before suddenly Lucario blurred. A sound met my ears I was quite familiar with. Extreme speed. Lucario suddenly appeared, slamming a fist into Chansey. Tanking the hit like it was barely there, Lucario had a moment of surprise on her face as Chansey's flippers grabbed her wrist. And then in an echoing boom, Lucario ended up in the dirt right next to her daughter. Both Pokémon, shocked at their circumstances, simply lay in the dirt. As Chansey looked over them, I was frowning though. What had Lucario wanted? Was she angry and lashing out at Chansey for hitting Riolu, looking for a challenge, or what? I walked over as the battle seemed over. Lucario wasn't hurt, but it was obvious she was surprised at what had just happened, and Chansey had seemingly knocked whatever fight she had in her, right out. You okay? I asked, and Chansey turned to look at me, throwing me a fin up. I threw her a thumbs up right back. Cool. So instead, I turned to the two pups. You two okay? Rio. Riolu growled, realizing I was the one asking. She jumped to her feet and glared at me, before rushing to her mother's side. Rio? Lucario. She replied back, rising up and brushing herself off. Chansey just watched on with a look in her eyes. A challenge. Lucario looked to Chansey, and then bowed her head in defeat. Rio. She offered, and Chansey smiled brilliantly, blasting mother and daughter with a heel pulse. Ariolu? The poor girl looked from her mother to Chansey back and forth, utterly shocked. I actually winced, because Riolu? She almost looked heartbroken. The shock of a child's faith in their parent being battered. I doubted the pup ever expected her mother to lose. Lucario explained calmly to Riolu, reaching out and patting her on the head, comforting the little girl. Rio. Rio. She argued and then looked to Chansey demanding. Chansey looked a little sad and just shook her head. Chansey, say, Chan. She explained and Riolu looked none too pleased. Rio. She argued, but Lucario reached out and picked up her daughter, shocking the pup and holding her tight as Rio looked pretty upset. Almost. No. She was crying. I think I understood what was going on, and since the fighting stopped I relaxed, despite Riolu being upset. Noticing Ivy had stepped away and was settling cross-legged in the grass holding Fomantis in her lap as they watched what was going on. I threw her a smile and thanks for being okay with just stepping back. She threw me a thumbs up. Nice. Whether the action, or it was time, Chansey looked over to me and smiled, waving me over. Since Chansey wanted me to, I walked over and leaned into her side for a second in greeting. Lucario looked at me, and simply sent me an apologetic nod of her head. I just shook my head in return, there was nothing to apologize for. Riolu was just angry and surprised, and not okay with her mom not being the strongest ever. As Lucario pet Riolu's head calming her daughter, she looked to Chansey and they started chatting. To my amusement, Chansey placed a hand on my head and was petting me as well. But the conversation between the two continued on, until Lucario asked a question, and Chansey tittered and nodded. Riolu hearing the question instantly snapped out of her fit and snapped out a refusal. Turning to Lucario and whining at her. Lucario just smiled and patted her on the head. Then the jackal looked at me. Lucario. Lulu. She spoke solemnly. I looked to Chansey and she met my eyes and rolled her eyes as if I should know what was happening. Oh no. No. I'm not letting that brat join my team. I denied and Chansey tittered and Lucario's eyebrows quirked up as if she was judging me. I'm not here to be judged. Don't give me that. She doesn't want to be on my team. Chansey tell Lucario. Chance. She denied me and patted my head, then she flexed her fin and pointed at a sullen Riolu. Then she pointed at me. Lucario wants me to make her daughter strong. I answered the entire reason for this situation. Chansey. She agreed. I groaned, because I knew this was a bad idea. Could I make Riolu strong? Of course. Lucario were fast powerhouses, and they would suit my training style perfectly. Only one problem. Riolu and I didn't exactly get along. I could see her derision in her eyes as she looked at me. I looked at her now, and saw that same emotion still. Riolu had no interest in me as a trainer. She didn't want this. You know she doesn't want to join me. I told Lucario she wants to stay with you. Lucario. Lucario. She spoke, although her words were more for Riolu. Rio. Riolu argued and Lucario looked at her, and then, the taller Pokemon knelt down and placed her paws on her daughter's shoulders. I couldn't follow the conversation that went on between them, but Riolu looked down. Then she looked back up. Her spine straightened and she barked out something looking firm, despite the tears in her eyes. Lucario looked down on her daughter with pride that even I could see, and nodded, stepping back and the small family split. Riolu walked over to me and barked at me with a pointed finger. A challenge, an offer, and a grim resignation. She wasn't happy, which is why I instantly reached down, grabbed a clod of dirt and smashed it into her face, full force. Rii screamed in shock at the sudden mud attack, stepping back and blowing her tongue out as I had managed to get some right into her mouth. Score. Ha ha ha. You look so stupid. I crowed out in delight, practically bending over and laughing at the look of complete shock on her face. Riolu. She roared and leapt at me. A moment later I was crashing into the dirt, the two of us scrambling to beat the other. I grabbed an ear and tugged it, earning a yelp, while she smashed a mud clod into my face. We rolled around, as we fought each other, constantly changing who was winning with every new move. I smashed her face into the mud, she bit my arm, earning her freedom from a headlock. And then we were both on our backs, gasping for breath. Ow. I muttered, and she whined a bit too. PBTHH, I spit mud out of my mouth, unable to really use my hands as they were covered in mud from earlier. Bleg. Riolu grunted as she wiped at her face. With a wince, I stood up and headed for my bag, which had been lost in the scuffle. I vaguely recall her choking me with the strap for a second, before I smashed it into Riolu's snout. I grabbed my water bottle and after a few seconds mostly had my face and hands mud-free, at least enough that I wasn't tasting dirt anymore. I walked over to the grumbling Riolu and poured out some water over her head. She glared at me from behind one eye, but eventually just accepted it, taking some water to spit and washing her eye and paws. "You're kinda dumb, you know," I said aloud. Loud enough that everyone could hear me. I noticed Ivy was still sitting watching all of this, even eating a snack with her fomantis as if this was a funny show. Riolu replied back with a glare, and I scoffed. "I wasn't talking just to you," I said, and then spun and pointed a strong finger at Lucario. "You idiot. Moron. Stupid," I called out, hammering in my words, to the surprise of the older jackal. "Lu?" she asked, shocked, a finger pointing up at her face like she couldn't believe that I was calling her stupid. "Yes, you. You were going to let Riolu run off with a strange human, someone she doesn't even get along with. Dummy. Riolu obviously still wants to stay with you, but you didn't think at all. Idiot. If you want Riolu to come with me so she can get stronger, then why don't you just come along as well? Idiot," I yelled at the top of my volume. Then I sighed and patted my clothes down, looking to Riolu, who looked just as surprised. "Adults, am I right? So how about it? Both of you can come along. I'll train Riolu if you want, and Lucario can train or not if you want, but at least you'll be close to Riolu to make sure she is okay. I mean, I have tons of Pokeballs," I said with a shrug, pulling 2 Pokeballs out of my bag, handing one to Riolu to her surprise, and then walking over to Lucario. "Chansey. Chance, Chan. Chansey called out, miming smacking herself in the forehead, and then throwing me a fins up. I returned her thumbs up immediately. "So how about it?" I offered a Pokeball. And Lucario looked down at it. Lu. Chapter 49. Vicky? Yes, Ivy? Ow. I yelped as Ivy kicked me in the shin. What was that for? Nothing, she said firmly, and I pouted at her. Okay, so yes, Ivy had been making eyes at Lucario since we first ran into the pair. But it wasn't like I was going to use her on my team. "Can we get back to actually battling?" Ivy asked, and I nodded, a bit embarrassed. "Sorry. We keep getting distracted." "It's fine, I guess. Are you going to let them out?" I looked at the 2 Pokeballs I was holding and sighed. "Yeah, I guess. Come on out," I called, and Riolu and Lucario both appeared from my Pokeballs. Both Pokemon shared a look of surprise as they sort of checked over themselves. "See? Nothing weird about Pokeballs," I offered, and Lucario nodded slowly, while Riolu scoffed. "Right, well. Ivy and I are doing some more battle practice if you want to watch. Or I guess you can head back to the cave or go back in the Pokeballs if you want. Up to you," I offered, and Lucario nodded, walking towards the edge of our little clearing and settling in. Riolu looked from her mother to me and then back to me. She scoffed and hurried after her mom. This time I rolled my eyes and turned back to Ivy. "Ready?" "Yeah," she said, and threw out Sawaddle. So. He cheered, and just as Ivy was going to give him a command, he turned around and leapt for Ivy. Poor Ivy screeched as he smacked right into her, and started sewing leaves into her hair. It might take a bit before Sawaddle is ready for battle. Lucario and Riolu followed us back to the cave after Ivy and I had battled each other out. Mostly for me it was Mimikyu, since Gibble was still a little early for that. But Ivy had an array of grass types that Mimikyu battled through, with Chansey recovering everyone afterwards. I just kept looking towards Lucario and Riolu as they followed the 2 of us back. This whole situation was so complicated. Riolu certainly hadn't been on my capture list. There was only one fighting type in Kitakami that I was on the lookout for, but if Lucario wanted her daughter to grow strong, then I couldn't deny I was a good bet for that. Chansey and Gravity alone would turn her into a powerhouse. That and Lucario were famous for being able to sense bad intentions. If Lucario or Riolu hung around my stable, it would keep things so much safer. But Riolu was a little brat. I huffed as I entered the cave and flopped onto my sleeping bag. That was good training, Ivy offered as she settled in herself. As she sat, she noticed that there was a hidden leaf sewn into the back of her pants as it crackled as she sat down. Sighing, she reached back and fiddled with it until it came out. It was. Mimikyu definitely deserves his rest. I patted his pokeball. Chansey might be able to heal, but that didn't mean the constant battles didn't take something out of him. He'd rest up until I made him some food, and then I would let him eat and sleep it off. Riolu demanded as she stood beside me, and I almost scoffed at her obvious desire before I controlled myself. She might be a brat, but Riolu was my responsibility now. No training yet. We need to work on our connection before we can do battle training, I explained calmly. Then, because I was going to be nice to my new Pokemon, I patted the bag beside me. Here, sit, I'll explain it, I offered, and while her eyes narrowed at me, eventually she looked to her mom, who nodded, and Riolu settled in beside me. Lucario though settled into a spot a bit farther away, just sort of watching as she leaned against the wall, arms crossed. Damn, she was so cool. I shook my head to get rid of the distraction. Then, because I was going to explain this, I might as well pull out another who needed to hear it. Hold on, I told Riolu, and carefully, I grabbed my blood-covered pokeball, although it was much cleaner now as the blood had mostly dried off and flaked. I released Gibble. Gib? She asked as she popped up a bit further into the cave and away from anyone in particular. Hey Gibble, I'm going to explain to Riolu about training, how we are going to get super strong. Do you want to come join us? I offered, and Gibble looked at me. I looked at her. She looked at me. Riolu looked from Gibble to me. And then Gibble's mouth opened wide. Gib. I see. I answered without seeing anything at all. What was that supposed to mean? Then she just walked over and plopped down next to me on the sleeping bag. Gib. Right. Anyway, training. So. First, Chansey is going to give you an examination, and we are going to come up with a nutrition plan. You can't grow stronger if you aren't eating everything your body needs to grow. So that is step 1. Riolu nodded slowly like she was trying to understand, while Gibble just sat there mouth open. No, she was drooling now. I guess the word eating had made her hungry. Once that is settled, we will get into training. Now I have a few secret training methods to raise strength, but at first, we aren't going to use them. I explained feet kicking. With all of you that I captured here in Kitakami, I'm going to focus on 2 things. 1. Battle training. Teaching you how to react in Pokemon battles, so you can grow strong there. Ivy helped with that already today, I said, and Ivy looked up from where she was grooming her Fomantis, the one that she battled with. I'm just using you to teach my Pokemon that, she replied back, with a sinister smile. I just ignored her, even as Riolu sort of scooted behind me a bit at Ivy's smile. Anyways, but then? Then we are going to do special training. I smacked a fist lightly into my palm. I have a training method to make you physically strong, but we are going to develop a secret method to make our special attacks better. Gib? I looked over to Gibble and realized. She had no idea what was going on. She was actually looking over at Fomantis with predatory eyes. So I distracted her, Gibble? I asked to get her attention, and when she was focused on me, I reached out and picked her up. Gib? She reacted in a little surprise, but was still calm as I planted her in my lap and started scritching. Her scales were rough, but not sharp, like they would be with rough skin, but it still felt weird to stroke her, but she really liked it as she leaned into me and just sort of relaxed. Mouth open, and a sigh of delight escaped her. Rio? Right. Riolu. We don't get along, I added, and she rolled her eyes and scoffed, as if that was obvious. But you want to get stronger, don't you? I added, and she froze, and then looked to Lucario, then to me. Riolu. She nodded firm, and I could see the fire in her eyes. Yeah, Riolu wasn't at the same level as Arcanine, but she was going to chase strength almost as avidly. Well then, experience and power. Power I can give you just through training, and while you won't have to listen to me too much, you will have to listen to Chansey. If you get yourself hurt, you'll never get strong. My strong words had an impact, and she nodded slowly. Then if you want experience in battles, well, that means you will have to listen to me, to trust me. I can't battle with you against others if you don't listen. I explained, and instantly Riolu reacted with a scoff. Yeah, that's sort of what I mean. We'll work on it. You brat. I looked down at Gibble, and couldn't help but smile. She was so cute. Look at her chompers. Even if I felt like my hands where she had bit me were tingling. That was just the fear. And the best way to overcome the fear was to just go forward full power, so I squeezed Gibble tightly. You are gonna be so strong, and will be one of my best friends. I whispered to her. Hey Vicky? Ivy asked after a minute, and I looked up. Yeah, what's up, Ivy? How long are we going to stay in Kitakami? I blinked in surprise. Ivy looked a little embarrassed, but I nodded. We had been here a while. You want to go home? Maybe soon? I have a lot of training to do, and it'll be easier if I'm at home. Right. Plus when we get back, it'll probably be a day or so until the league examines our new friends. You think it'll take that long? Probably. Governments can be slow about things. There's still a Pokemon I want to catch, but I'll need to go searching. Well, actually a few, but they'll be easier. Oh wait, Lucario? I asked, looking to the older Pokemon. Do you know if there are any Petalil or Lilligant here in Kitakami? Lucario. She asked, and then nodded. Wait. Isn't that the grass type you mentioned? Yep. Do you know where we could find them? Ivy was searching for one. Ivy jumped up, almost ready to run out of the cave, but I was looking at Lucario because, do you know where Kamao or any of their line are at? Instantly Lucario's face drooped. Like she was tired. Slowly, almost like she was forcing herself, she nodded. Lucario, Rio, Lu. She added, but she nodded. Kamao? Ivy asked, and I nodded. They are another dragon type. A very defensive one, that's also a fighting type. I explained, and then Ivy looked at me, and just giggled. Vicky, are you trying to be a dragon master? Well. Maybe. They're cute. Dragons are supposed to be hard to train. Actually. I think that's wrong. I said, pointing at Gibble. See, Gibble and most first evolution dragon types tend to be a little weaker on average. I hugged Gibble tightly. Not that they are incapable or anything. But they aren't the strongest, and they tend to take a long time to evolve. I don't think they are hard to train, I think they just take a long time to train, and people conflate the two. Okay? I puffed out my cheeks at Ivy's flat response. Dragons do tend to have anger issues, yes, but they are also very kind. Most dragons love hugs and affection. Look at Dragonite. Ivy opened her mouth and then closed it. Dragonite is very sweet. Hee hee. See. Listen to Dragon Master Vicky. She is going to show Kanto how lovely and nice all the dragons are. I laughed, spinning around in a full circle, which ended up being a massive mistake. My ponytail flopped around, and into Gibble's mouth, which meant she had one response. Chomp. No. Gibble. Let go. That's my hair. It looks. Okay? I looked over at Ivy pouting, and definitely not crying. Really? Yeah. Sure. You look cuter with shorter hair. Ivy assured me. Scissors in hand. I had lost about 70% of my ponytail to Gibble's stomach. I sniffled and continued to poke the floor with a finger. Gibble's sharp teeth had cut most of my ponytail off, and it was only thanks to Ivy that I didn't look like a toddler had decided to cut their own hair. You can stop at a salon when we get back to Kanto. I'm sure everyone will want you to look your best for the league. Ivy offered, but I just shook my hair. I didn't want to look good for the league. I wanted my ponytail. Come on, Vicky. It's okay. It'll grow back. Yeah, I know. I grumbled, deciding I had moped long enough. I rose up and rubbed at my face, definitely not clearing up tears. Lucario. I called out, pointing right at her as she pointed at herself. Yes, you. Where are the petalil? Luca. She pointed out of the cave, which didn't do much good, but Ivy was almost buzzing. Is it close enough for you to guide Ivy? I asked, and she blinked before nodding. Good. Then you take Ivy, Riolu. You are my guide to the Kamao. We go out and maybe head home tomorrow? Maybe the day after. I still need to go fishing after all. I giggled at that joke, because I definitely wasn't going to use a fishing pole. Lou? Lucario hesitated, but I just smiled and released Dragonite. She trilled as she stretched, looking around for what was going on. Riolu is going to guide us to another group of dragons. I explained, and Dragonite perked up in interest, then pointed at herself, and I nodded. Yep. Garchomp responded well to your appearance, so we are going to do that again. Gib? Gibble asked, looking away from the wall she had been staring at for the last few minutes. We aren't going to see your family right now. Unless you want to? I offered, and Gibble just stared at me. Then she shook herself, to my surprise actually reacting to my words. A negative response, but still. She was able to understand a little, whether that was only because she wanted to, or just because her family had that much of an impact on her. Either way, my irritation at the loss of my hair still existed, but I recognized Gibble's reaction. I walked over, and before she could react, I pulled her into a hug, lifting her off her feet and holding her tightly. It's okay, Gibble. You'll see. You are definitely someone we all want around. I told her, even as she seemed to be utterly still, more in shock than anything. Dragonite added in, walking over and lifting me right off my feet, and squeezing Gibble and I in a big squishy hug. Gibble would realize someday that she was loved. Rio. Riolu pointed from behind me. We had all set out after hug time. Dragonite agreed, and we banked around the mountain. I actually wasn't surprised where Riolu was guiding us. The Paradise Barrens on the northwest side of the mountain had been where you could find them in the game. Now if only Riolu would stop jabbing me in the side as we flew along, this could be more peaceful. I jabbed back, getting a solid connection to her, getting a nice oof. From the jackal. Dragonite. Dragonite scolded both of us as she looked back at us for a moment, and Riolu and I both stopped roughhousing under Dragonite's judgmental stare. Sorry. I said to Dragonite and Riolu, even if she had started it. Rio. She apologized as well, although I think in her case it was more the angry Dragonite glaring at her. She nodded pleased, and then with a single flap of her wings, we were moving again at a rapid pace. Which way? I asked, and Riolu pointed, and Dragonite adjusted, but as we started flying over the barrens I realized I didn't even need to ask anymore. Because I could hear them. The sounds of metal ringing up from the barrens. Clashing of steel, and roars of dragons. I could feel myself growing even more excited as Dragonite shifted and surged forward. More cuties. Dragonite winged up and pulled to a stop atop a large rock overlooking what looked like an arena. Compacted dirt and rock, and the Pokémon were playing music, sort of. A group of Jangmo were challenging each other. Scales were slammed into to make noise as they faced their opponents, and each side responded with a shift in the group and then a large noise ringing out. It was familiar. Like I had seen this before somewhere. I slipped off Dragonite's back. Riolu hopped off and whined a bit as she clapped her paws against her ears. Oh. That explains why Lucario had looked so put out about the Kamao. Want to go back in your ball? I offered, and despite her discomfort, she shook her head, glaring at me. But I also couldn't just let her keep getting hurt like this. I grabbed my bag and dug through it, medical section, med kit, and, yep. I had some. I grabbed a bunch of cotton balls and offered them to Riolu, who just looked at me like I was crazy. Put them in your ears. I said loud enough to be heard, and she blinked before looking at them, and then she swiftly started snatching them up and stuffing them into her ears. She blinked. Rio. She belted out much louder than needed, but looking actually happy. Then I could turn back to the view, but Dragonite I noticed was very focused on what was happening. But not the little Jangmo. While I was distracted, they had 4 Hakamo join them and they were adding their own noise to the group. But then 2 Kamo stepped out, and that is what Dragonite was focused on. Then they rang out, and this time I pressed my hands against my ears to block out the noise. But it wasn't just noise. I blinked as I realized what it was. With the larger dragons being bipedal, I was able to recognize what was happening. They were dancing. Choreographed dancing, but one I had seen the like of before. It was a haka. The dragons were performing a haka against each other. I felt my mouth drop open, because it was fucking cool. They shook, they slammed palms against chest plates and elbows, stomped in time, and the differences in metal coats lent a musical element to it. The tinier Jangmo, brassy Hakamo, and the booming bass of the Kamo. This was both training, challenge, and culture all tied into one. Dragonite was focused and interested due to the draconic challenge inherent. And then it ended. Both sides finished their challenge, and the crowd of other dragons around all rose a voice together, calling out and making noise. It was as cacophonous as their Z move. Then I giggled, because it was like a group of parents watching a little league game. They were calling out who they thought had done the best. Pointing and clattering against each other. I had a feeling that a brawl would break out soon if not for a single loud ringing. Not the largest. Not the toughest. No. But that was definitely the oldest Kamo. His ringing sound wasn't as loud. It quavered in a way that told me the steel of his armor was not as strong as it should be. But at the sound everyone went silent. And then he stepped in between the two groups, looking them both over, and pointed at the one on his left. The ones on his right bowed at his judgment, and there was a great cheer for the victors. That looks like fun, I said, and Dragonite beside me looked over and nodded happily. We were both on one thought. I wanted to do it too. I looked to Riolu and gave her a big smile. She instantly seemed to realize my intentions. She shook her head. I nodded. She shook harder. I nodded. Harder. She made to run. Dragonite picked her up. Both of us smiled brightly. Rio. She held, but it was too late. Dragonite leapt, as I jumped on her back and we both flew over to get involved. Chapter 50. We landed with a light puff of air and dust just outside Kamo Arena. The dragons reacted, forming into lines, the littlest ones pushed back. Clanging scales and hard looks were sent our way. Even the little Jangmo formed a wall of shields behind their elders like tiny little hoplites, and the elder was quickly hidden behind the bulk of 2 Kamo. Dragonite rose up to her full height, as I worked my magic, grabbing Riolu out of her arms, and standing on Dragonite's left, with Riolu on mine. Then, I started the challenge. Ha! I called out as I stomped on the ground, spreading my legs. I had seen a haka before in a previous life. I knew there was a song that went with it, but I had no idea what it was. So I improvised. Do what I do. I told Riolu and Dragonite instantly joined in, stomping just after, and mimicking my stance. I looked to Riolu, who looked so done with this entire situation. So I looked at her, glaring when she seemed to refuse. She looked at me, then she looked up. She sighed, and I turned to see Dragonite's face go from looking fearsome to happy and gentle. I almost giggled. Dragonite could be scary if she wanted to. Then Riolu gave a cry and slammed her right leg into the ground as she squared her stance. This sent a current through the Kamo, and a moment later a decision was made: a Kamo, a Hakamo, and a Jangmo all squared up opposite us. Wait. Why was the other Jangmo in the middle? That's my spot. The leader spot. That should be a Kamo. They had matched us, just with Hakamo in Riolu's place, and Kamo facing Dragonite. Mean. I shook it off. If they thought I was the weakest, I would just prove them wrong. The dragons mimicked my own actions, each of them in turn slamming their right foot down, or in Jangmo's case, 2 right feet. And then we faced each other. I want to be the very best. I yelled out, slamming my right hand into my left elbow. That was a move from the hakas I had seen so long ago. My Pokemon mimicked me, even calling out alongside me, just one step behind. Which actually was kinda cute. But I couldn't get distracted now. I was the leader. Like no one ever was. I slammed my left foot, stepping forward. To catch them is my real test. Another elbow slap. To train them is my cause. This time I slapped my chest. Then the Kamo interrupted, copying my movements, and calling out his own haka in denial, obviously not impressed. Damn. Pokemon theme song didn't work, I thought for sure it would. Enough of this. What are you doing here, child? A human voice called out, interrupting my next line. It was a good one. I was going to start going into how strong I had trained my friends. I looked over and, that's a really nice hat. I said flatly, it was the only thing that popped into my head. It's a helmet. The old man snapped back. He was wearing a Kamo-shaped kabuto helmet. Like an old samurai. The old man's jinbei, his clothes were just like the Mosway town villagers though. The Jangmo opposite me suddenly released a call, and the dragons all cheered. Oh. Hey. You interrupted so I lost. I yelped, realizing what had happened. I looked to Riolu who just scoffed at me, showing no sympathy as she ended her stance and just rolled her eyes at me. But then I looked to Dragonite, who? Oh, she was super mad. She actually reminded me more of Iris's Dragonite at that moment. All red in the face and glaring, like steam was going to pop out of her ears. Ah. Dragon pride, and she had just been beaten basically by accident. Before she could start an outrage, or something, I reached up and grabbed her hand. We'll work on it, and do even better next time. We'll blow them away. I told her, and she looked away from the old man to me, and I smiled happily up at her, and then her face relaxed and she picked me up. She whined, sounding a bit irritated, but at least she wasn't mad anymore. She hugged me using me as a stress ball as she grumbled a bit over my head as she glared at the old man, but she would look back down at me, and calm down with a bit of a huff. Cute. Che. Don't think just because you have a dragon that it makes it alright for poaching. What dash I interrupted Dragonite's hug because I was so shocked. Poaching? Of course. Don't think I'm a fool. You came to capture a Kamo for your very own. Well, you can't. These are all mine. He crowed out as he stomped over, but as he did, it became very obvious to me that this situation wasn't as simple as this old man was hinting at. Because all of the dragons were watching him with the same eyes they were looking at me. As an outsider. He walked over, and a Hakamoo didn't move to let him pass. The dragon glared and stood its ground, and the old man had to sort of awkwardly scoot around them. I don't think they belong to you. I argued as he approached, but my accusation made the old man absolutely blow up. I am Tetsuryu Tetsuhara. My family ruled Kitakami for 18 generations. It is my own ancestor that brought these great dragons to Kitakami from a far and distant land. You dare. Your ancestors went to Alola? I questioned because I guess that was possible? Wha? He gasped as if I had stabbed him as he stepped back and pointed an accusing finger at me. How do you know the name of the secret islands my ancestor visited during his sea voyage? The place full of dangerous and powerful Pokemon. With barbaric people that he had to fight his way back to Kitakami from. I blinked. Alola is a resort island though? The man looked at me. I looked at him. And nonsense. The beasts of Alola were recorded as being the most dangerous in the entire world. He traveled to the island during the great exploration of the seas. He captured many powerful rare Pokemon and brought them home along with fearsome and terrible treasures from the natives. The people were evil barbarians. Barely living out of mud huts. He dash. Kinda sounds like a pirate. I interjected. The man's voice left him as he just gaped at me. Speechless. I sort of just hung there awkwardly as Dragonite hadn't let go of me yet. Yep. I offered, popping the pea as loud as I could. You dare. He screeched loud enough even the Kamo winced at his scream, or at least some of them did. Heh. Kamo had soundproof. Riolu added, actually agreeing with me as she nodded along. KKK. He sort of got stuck trying to speak, his face going red in outrage. Komoo. A voice interrupted and I looked as the elder Kamo walked over. The ancient dragon walked slowly. And I could see why. His hips looked bulgy. This girl. The old man shrieked, pointing at me, but looking to Kamao. The dragon just shrugged, walking over, and to my surprise just reached out and plopped a hand onto the old man's helmet. The old man quieted and growled, but didn't argue against the dragon. The interaction, and the realization at just how old this Kamao probably was. Was he your Pokemon? The old man glanced to me, and his shoulders shook for a moment. No. He has led the Kamao here since long before I was born. I tried many times as a child to capture him. But I was never worthy of that. The old man explained haltingly, as he caught his breath. My ancestor brought them here, and we were even known for the great strength of the noble armored Pokemon in ages past. When we were samurai that protected this land, we were not pirates. I kinda wanted to point out that a samurai could still be a pirate, but I didn't really want to argue with this old man. Como. The elder turned to me, and he looked me over. No, I realized. He looked at Dragonite. Dragonite. She greeted him back, and just with that the elder seemed to realize something. He looked down to me, our eyes met. Kamao? He asked, and Dragonite trilled a laugh. Before I could ask what he had said, her hand came up and plopped on my head, patting my head. Hey? But Dragonite didn't answer, just continued to pat me. The elder nodded slowly, seemingly pleased. He turned and walked back into the crowd, and the entire horde seemed to relax, turning to go about their day as if nothing had happened. Well, that was weird, I said, but the old man just scoffed. The leader sees something in you. I'm surprised. The last time some brats snooped around here, the entire horde worked together to send them packing. Pfft, damned blonde brats. Rude, I remarked. So what if I was blonde? Well, as you can see, the Kamao aren't for capturing to outsiders. Go on, leave, he said, throwing shoe gestures at me. No thanks, I said, because I wasn't a dog, and these Kamao weren't his. What? I told you to leave. And I already said I don't think they belong to you. They seem more willing to put up with you than anything. Then I shrugged out of Dragonite's grip. But I won't capture them randomly. I'll only capture a Pokemon that wants to be my friend. Faye. None of them have ever been willing to join a trainer. So you are wasting your time. And mine for having to watch you. I looked at him, and realized what he had actually said. You must have been interacting with them for a long time trying to find a partner. Sorry, that kinda sucks. They are all my Pokemon. He denied, but his overreaction told a lot. The #1 Kamao fan couldn't capture one. Rough. Oh look. How cute. I called out, immediately distracted from the old man by a pair of Jangmo rough housing, head-butting until they were standing on their hind legs as they pushed their heads together, their little scratchy claws making metallic shrieks on each other's metal plates. Yes, the little ones often face each other to grow stronger. The first one to fall back, or show their back, will fail. They are Pokemon that never retreat in the face of their enemies. They learn this even as babies. The old man offered, and I realized that I hadn't been wrong in calling him the #1 Kamao fan. He was totally nerd gushing. Does their armor get bigger, or just thicker, or denser? Their armored plates grow larger, based on how often they are shed. But they always shed their plates about once every few years. The poor Pokemon always look so embarrassed with their growing in plates. He offered, and I really wanted to squeal at the idea of an embarrassed Hakamo hiding his armorless body from the others. So cute. Wanted to hug. Riolu. Riolu interrupted, reaching over and poking my cheek in irritation. Well, what? I demanded as I slapped her hand away. Then she pointed and I gasped, and then glared. There were more than a few dragons looking at Dragonite and greeting her. A few were even daring to try and court her. I recognized blushing Tiage. Hakamo. You. There was even a Kamao that was dragon dancing at her, flexing and showing off his body. Milotic. I called out and released my prettiest boy. He appeared with a trilling greeting as he stretched, before he too noticed the problem. Dragonite. Dragonite greeted him a little awkwardly as she was sort of leaning away from all the boys that were hounding her. Mai! He hissed out, and the Hakamoo and Kamoo that were flirting with Dragonite focused on him. Is that a Milotic? The old man asked, but I ignored him. Instantly they all gathered up into a line, to challenge Milotic, but to my anger, and Milotic's as well, they formed a line between Dragonite and Milotic. That was on purpose. They danced, clapping steel and stomping earth in challenge for what they thought they could take. Milotic watched seemingly confused for a moment, but even if he wasn't a dragon, he wouldn't allow anyone to try and take his waifu from him. He glanced at me as they worked, and I nodded and then gave him some clues. I smacked my elbow trying to make it loud and danced a little. He blinked and looked from me to the group. Then he seemed rather fed up. As they were still in their haka, he reached up and slapped the earth with his tail. The sound of it didn't shriek like metal, it rumbled rock. It was a noise alien to the Kamoo squad. Milotic uses pseudo-earthquake. It's super effective. The dragon boys all jolted and Milotic then continued. A noise built up and then exploded out of him, as he took a deep breath and then exhaled full power out of his spouts. The wind whistled sharply, and he shifted and danced. Dragon dance. He danced, slapping his tail to the earth, with every beat. Damn. Milotic had gotten pretty good at dragon dance. He even managed it while distracted. The movement definitely threw the Hakamoo squad for a loop as they looked to their leader. The Kamoo just glared and slammed his armor. A massive noise almost like a gong echoed out. Suddenly, the Hakamoo shifted and stepped back. Your Milotic is in trouble. That was a battle challenge. Kamoo won't accept just a dance to determine who is the winner anymore. The old man offered, having been watching with sharp eyes the whole time. Oh. Well, that's fine then. Milotic. Smack him around. Don't let anyone try to steal your girl. I called out, not intending on doing any trainer orders. Milotic didn't need it. That Kamoo wasn't the biggest one in the arena. No, he was likely one of the youngest, still hanging out with Hakamoo. Milotic held out a challenge back, and then it was on. Kamoo charged, fist cocked back, but as he approached, he shifted and leapt into an uppercut that rocked back Milotic's head. I gasped. Sky uppercut? But why had Milotic just taken the hit? I trained him better than that. Kamoo held in victory but went silent as Milotic slowly moved his head back down, pushing back against the first embedded against his scales. Milo. Then Milotic's head went steel and he arced up before slamming face first into the Kamoo. The shriek of metal was familiar. Sounded like a Kamoo battle, and a moment later, Kamoo staggered back. There was a beat picking up, as Kamoo around the arena stomped a foot. Then the Hakamoo joined in, and the Jangmoo did too. This straightened the spine of the Kamoo, and he shifted himself. Then he too slammed forward and his own steel head slammed into Milotic. I relaxed. Despite the noise echoing out, and Milotic's grunt of pain. Well, Milotic was resistant against steel type, and I wasn't about to tell Kamoo that. Another echoing sound of steel on steel, and the Kamoo had enough. That was all he could take. His legs buckled and he slammed into the ground, unable to continue to battle against Milotic's overwhelming physical power. Milu! He roared out a noise he didn't usually make as he straightened up and glared at the Hakamoo that very quickly took a few steps back, never turning from him, but still showing they didn't want any of Milotic's attention. The arena then turned into a clatter of noise as the dragons cheered the battle, slapping steel or stomping stone. Milo? Great job. I called out over the noise, and then as Milotic turned to me, I pointed. Dragonite was giving her husband bedroom eyes. Milotic went a little pink at the look and then he seemingly decided to say fuck it. Milu. He roared again and strutted as much as one can without legs over to Dragonite before pulling her away. Rio? I'll explain it when you're older. I told Riolu, who looked confused at why my Pokemon had just run off into the desert. Milotic wrapped around his big waifu as she flew him away from prying eyes. Can't say I was expecting that. The old man suddenly spoke up, looking a little confused at the situation. That Milotic shouldn't have beaten a Kommo-o, even if that little one was just evolved. Kommo-o is pretty strong, but I mean, my Pokemon won't lose, I said, fully confident in my team. He scoffed and looked away. Heh. The Kommo-o fanboy old man didn't like seeing his favored Pokemon get beaten, but with that situation concluded. I looked around. I sighed, and walked over to the unconscious Kommo-o. I reached for my belt, and grabbed Chansey's ball, but before I could do anything else, there was a noise, and multiple howls of outrage. I jolted at the sudden noise, and looked up at the very angry crowd of dragons. I blinked, but none of them seemed willing to calm down, and then I looked at my hand. Full of Pokeball. Ah! I dropped the Pokeball, and then in a burst of light Chansey appeared beside me. The dragons had jolted forward at the movement, like they were going to attack me, but then stalled out as Chansey appeared instead of a capture. I'm not going to try and capture him, I called out loudly, and then Chansey looked around before looking at the Kommo-o, then at me. Chance? She asked, waving at him and then at me. I coughed to hide a laugh, because I recognized that noise. Again? That was what Chansey asked me. Appearing in a dragon den with an unconscious dragon, it did sound like what happened with Garchomp. She sighed and then started healing. Her actions calmed down the area. Huh. That's not something you see every day. You a member of the Joys? What? No. I'm blonde. I don't know. Maybe you do that thing those kids do nowadays. Dyeing their hair all sorts of colors. I don't. Other trainers can capture a Chansey, you know. The old man grumbled and shrugged his shoulders, but seemed pleased as the knocked-out Kommo-o rose up shakily and then wandered off looking a bit dazed. Kommo-o. A voice old and gravely called out, and I looked surprised to see the elder Kommo-o again. He staggered forward, slowly approaching me. Chansey greeted him, and without even speaking, she walked up and started checking him over. I could tell he was shocked at her presumption, but a moment later as she blasted a bit of pink into his hip, he sighed and his eyes fluttered, almost closed, and any outrage he had was gone. Chansey, Chance-chan. She spoke as she worked, definitely berating the old Kommo-o as she worked to help him out. Kommo-o all around had another flash of outrage at her audacity, but had calmed quickly at his noise of relief. Then they approached to look over what Chansey was doing. She ignored the onlookers and instead focused on healing, even reaching out and doing some muscle rubs. Elder Kommo-o looked like he was in heaven. Old man Tetsuya looked like he was in shock. Should I capture a Chansey? He wondered to himself in a whisper, and I smiled. Yes. The answer if you should capture a Chansey is always yes, because they are amazing. Finally, Chansey stepped back and nodded. Chance. Chance-chan. She explained, seeming to rattle off some instructions to the elder, and he slowly nodded, seeming a bit dazed at her rapid-fire explanation. Kommo. He responded, and she tittered and waved it off, before pointing at me. I then pointed at me, because why was I being pointed at? Chan, say. She explained, and he looked from her to me, before slowly his head nodded. Kommo. He said, and then to my surprise, he waved to me, to approach. I did, reaching Chansey's side wondering what was going on, and then the elder settled into a stance. Ah. The leader's dance? For you? Tetsuya gasped in shock. He looked from me to the old dragon and then seemed to regain himself, rubbing at his chin, before deciding something. He's shown me this multiple times, but I can't figure out what he is trying to show. Watch well. He said to me, his pride in the elder outweighing his dislike of me. Watching was definitely on the plan, but I winced at the creak of his joints, despite Chansey's help, at the weakness the old dragon displayed. His clawed hands shook as he held them out, and as he moved his arms. But I watched wondering what it meant, but slowly I recognized something. A movement that I knew like the back of my hand. How could anyone forget the position for the Kamehameha wave? I instantly wigged to what was happening. I suppressed my gasp. I knew what he was testing. What he was trying to convey. To show. I took the starting stance, and as the old dragon finished, he looked to me, a pleased look in his eyes, and he restarted despite his obvious exhaustion. I copied him, doing my best to follow and connect. I had to memorize this. When we finished, as I slammed my fists together in front of me, I roared it out. The name of this move. Clangorous Soulblaze. I called, and for just a moment, despite not having AZ crystal, despite not having any connection to this dragon, I felt it. We connected. Everything went silent. The elder's eyes were opened wide in shock behind his armor, and the entire clan of dragons stared at me. Our eyes locked on each other, and I knew just how amazing an offering the elder dragon had given me. Thank you, Elder, for teaching me the moves. One day, I hope I earn the right to finish the trials. I spoke gently, the only thing that I could think of to say. What was that? What is Clangorous Soulblaze? Old man Tetsuryu asked, and I looked at him, finally breaking the eye lock with the elder. It's the name of a Z move. Kamoa's specific Z move in fact. What? What is a Z move? The old man asked, almost desperate for an answer. It's a connection between Pokemon and trainer. Working together in sync, to create a move of incredible power, but more importantly, to show their bond to each other. I answered back. Then I did the moves again. Syncing the moves as best as I remembered. Each Z move has motions connected to it. You learn the motions from the Pokemon, they know it. It's a part of them. A creation of bonds between human and Pokemon. Proof we were always meant to help each other. I extolled as I finished once again. Proving I had memorized it. The elder answered back nodding, and I smiled at him. But you need 3 things to perform a Z move. I added on a little sadly. A Z ring. A piece of a legendary Pokemon forged into an item that can help empower humans. A Z crystal, of the correct type, or Pokemon, to insert into the Z ring. A connection forms between trainer and Pokemon. And of course the most important thing of all. A friend. You can't do it if you aren't friends with your Pokemon. The elder dragon suddenly started jolting, and I almost flinched before I realized he wasn't in danger, or sick. He was laughing, a wheezing noise of delight. He calmed after a few moments and nodded, agreeing with me. Como. Calm. He chattered in his gravely voice, and then he turned and called out. Ko. The rest of the dragons all responded, and an excitement ran through everyone. A few moments later, the dragons lined up and the elder looked among them. Before pointing, Jang. A Jangmo called out, having been pointed out by the elder, and the little guy ran forward eagerly, practically galloping before skidding to a stop. Jang. He cheered, leaping and doing a cute little wiggle with his legs as they were off the ground before landing, and then nodding, looking pumped up, barely able to stop himself from tippy-tapping his legs as he tried to look serious. Then the little Jangmo turned to me, and I knew. I see. I agreed simply then because it was the right way to do it. I hunkered down and started the haka for the Clangorous Soulblaze. As I worked, Jangmo followed along as he could without fully free arms, but when I finished, I was sure. Hello Jangmo. I'm Vicky. My dream is to have fun, explore the world, train powerful Pokemon, and live my life without regrets. I called out loudly, then I dug into my bag and pulled out a premier ball. Will you join me? Travel the world and grow stronger than anyone. Jang. He cheered and leapt, and the ball clacked shut. I had a Jangmo. I cheered, tapping my feet in place as I delighted in my new friend. The gravely voice called, and I looked up from the pokeball to see Kamo digging under his armor for a moment, and then, oh. He spoke, opening up his palm, and therein resting was Camomium Z. A Z crystal. Old. It was an old Z crystal, something I could tell from a single glance. The yellow crystal was scuffed with age, yet the black symbol inside was still visible. I don't have a Z ring. I explained, and Kamo just offered it to me again. I nodded, reaching out and taking the Z crystal. I promise, I'll find a way to use this. Even if I have to go to Alola. Como. The elder rumbled gently, and then reached out and patted me on the head. I don't understand. Tetsuya muttered, looking a little lost. Why? Why wasn't I? Why didn't you ever choose me? I'd been with you my entire life. Como. The elder rumbled, trying to sound comforting, but I don't think it really helped. The old man just looked kind of devastated. I didn't know what to say, and by the time I tried to say something, it was too late. Tetsuya turned and walked away. A long walk ahead of him, as I think he was heading towards Mosway town. I watched him go along with the elder, just like me. I could tell the elder didn't feel good about what had happened. I shook it off. I couldn't change what had happened. Only do the best I could. I squeezed the pokeball in one hand, and the Z crystal in the other. Alola. I was going to have to go someday. But that was for the future, now? Now I needed to check in on Ivy, see how her day of exploration had gone, and prepare. It was getting close to time to head home. But my feet couldn't move. I don't know why you didn't give it to him. He obviously loves you and your family. But I promise, I'll train Jangmo until he becomes very strong. And I'll love him and be his friend for my entire life. The elder offered, looking at me, and nodding, seemingly pleased. Okay, now I had to gather up Chansey, who was wandering around offering her healing, and then gather up Dragonite and Milotic. Well, maybe I would give them a while to themselves.